Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Please be seated. We start second part of our conference immediately. Sorry, I used to lead a committee and it was a very good tool to obtain the requested silence. I'm sorry, please be seated. We have to start immediately because our time is limited. Good afternoon once more. This time I take moderating of the third panel. I'm Anna Fotyga of Poland, member of the European Parliament ECR Group, and it is my pleasure once more to host outstanding speakers, panelists of this third panel that is to focus on de-imperialization and decolonization of the Russian Federation. All of us remember that the late president of the United States, Ronald Reagan, called the Soviet Union the evil empire, or empire of evil. We used to call same country the prison of nations, and actually it was earlier like this, even under Tsarist era. Unfortunately, also in contemporary times, after collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation started to pursue same policies, maybe with slightly changed external picture, but still for many of us quite similar. And we would like also to speak about the prison of nations after current war of aggression waged by Russian Federation on Ukraine, accelerated and to full-scale invasion on February 24th of 2022. It is my privilege to give the floor immediately to our distinguished panelists. I start with Mr. Rafat Gabasov, representing Bashkortostan. Mr. Gabasov is a refugee. He was granted a political asylum in Lithuania. But his topic is to speak about his country, Bashkortostan Republic. Floor is yours.
Good afternoon, dear friends. I represent Bashkortostan National Movement. I'm also a member of the League of Free Nations, which represents dozens of colonized people of the Russian Federation. And of course, I am a representative of Bashkir people, 2 million people, which is colonized by Moscow. The war in Ukraine has been going on for almost a year, and we can already be sure what future awaits all of us. Of course, Russia will inevitably lose, and all the occupied lands will be returned to Ukraine. Also, after the defeat in the war with Ukraine, Russia will face a turmoil. Will it happen during Putin's lifetime or after his death? No, it's not so important. It's inevitable. And the most important thing is the following one. All those of us who are here advocate for the formation of new independent states on the territory of Russia. Bashkir National Movement, which I represent here, is also fighting for independence of Bashkortostan. It has been our long-held dream. For more than 200 years, we've been fighting for the freedom from the Russian Empire, and my nation is still alive, but because of Russian repressions, killings of the best people of Bashkir nation, Holodomor, or artificial famine, ethnocide and linguicide, our Bashkir nation has decreased in number for the last 100 years. We've faced genocide of Bashkir people. In 2 years, we lost more than 700,000 people because of famine. 1/3 of the Bashkir people doesn't think about the Bashkir language as of their mother tongue. It's impossible for us to get access to universities and to high schools in Bashkir language. One of the members of our national movement, Dir Muhamedov, is in prison. He's got 9 years of prison because he wanted to reform our state. Bashkir national organizations are banned. Bashkort, my organizations, was banned in 2020. They call it an extremist organization because we protect the interests of Bashkir people. Only the independence of Bashkortostan can save my people from assimilation. And in the global world, the assimilation process has even increased its speed, so we have very little time. But we see that the West is not interested in the collapse of Russia and in the liberation of its peoples. Yeah, of course, Baltic states, Poland, and of course Ukraine are more in favor of the collapse of Russia, but all the other Western countries don't like this option, and we were not able to convince them that it is necessary. So, what should happen? All of us represent different national republics in Russia. All of us are in touch with our regions, and all of us know how things are there in Russia. And in Russia, most of the people are victim to the propaganda, and they support the war in Ukraine. Those who are in touch with the people, they understand what I'm talking about. Well, maybe in some regions, like in Ichkeria, it's not like this. But the reality in other regions, unfortunately, is as I presented. We used to make plans and cherish hopes that NATO would help us and that we would be helped by Ukraine. But I don't believe it could happen because, well, we know that NATO won't go inside Russia, and as soon as Russian troops are forced out of Ukraine, well, Ukrainian troops will stop. So, how can we achieve independence in such circumstances? As I can see it, the process of Russia's disintegration will most likely happen without us or without our participation. Like in 1991, local elites will come into power, elites that are already part of the Russian system, and they will be supported by the Russian people. And those elites control financial resources as well as public administrations, and sometimes even power structures, police forces. So most likely they will come into power, well, in some parts of Russia via elections, in other regions by force. Moscow won't be able to tell anyone what to do because there would be struggle for power there. And it's likely there would be no opposition in the regions to this movement because we have no civil society. and there is no opposition in place. So what can we do? I very much hope that after this forum, Western politicians will understand that the problem of Russian empire is very serious, that the problem of disintegration of the Russian empire is very serious, and that we need to do something. We need to have a council in the framework of the European Union with the representation of national movements. I know that EU politicians are working with Russian opposition, but those so-called good Russians speak on behalf of all the Russia. It means on behalf of dozens of peoples, national republics and regions, but they have no right to speak on our behalf. We, Bashkir people, haven't given them the right to speak on our behalf. Chechen people haven't given them this right as well. Many other peoples refuse it. So if nothing happens after this forum, and if we are left to our problems, then I suggest, first of all, to propose to the Russian opposition to form a union and to create an army consisting of the forces of national republics and of Russian regions. And after the defeat of Russia, this armed force, trained by Western specialists, will enter the territory of Russia and will achieve its complete defeat. And for this, we need to form an alliance of the Russian opposition. And the condition should be those regions that want separate themselves from Russia should have this opportunity. And if the Russian opposition refuses to create such alliance, then we should create a united armed force on our own. Of course, there is a risk of nuclear weapons, but I don't believe that Kremlin would use nuclear weapons against their own territory. So, to summarize, only we can liberate our countries. And I will conclude by the quotation from Goethe. Those are worth of life and freedom who go into battle for them every day. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Davut Dorjayev, the representative of Oyrat Republic. He's a lawyer active in Human Rights Center Memorial. Actually, we here in the European Parliament and surely in Poland, we used to consider those working and active within the framework of Memorial as actually probably the most noble part of societies of Russian Federation. The achievements of this organization is well known. But now he would like to present the situation of Oyrat. That's his people, and we give him the floor.
Thank you, Deputy. On behalf of my Congress of Oyrat Republic, Oyrat Kalmyk people, I'd like to thank the event makers for inviting me as a legitimate representative of my people and of my political organization. I agree with Ruslan on what issue. I agree that we must think globally, that we must leave all these details and join up borders for each other and trying to debate things that are now not a part of reality. What is more important, I think, is to try to foresee the consequences of processes that are about to happen, are about to become reality. In that regard, I believe it is crucially important that all of us would agree that there's no use of debating state borders inside our regions. I believe that our regions must act collectively on many levels. I refer to economic level mostly. It is crucially important that in our regions, the four freedoms principle, which was brought to life by European Union, European communities, would act on a large scale, that between our regions there will be no borders for people, for persons, for goods, for financial resources. But the thing is that these communities, economic integration, which must be open and tolerant to ethnic and linguistic minorities, obviously, should be protected from outside. In that regard, it is crucially important that our Western partners, our partners from abroad, would contribute, help, aid to our movements, to our peoples. And I'm not telling you that anybody should help us for nothing, that we have nothing to guarantee on our part. I believe we are talking about a global security issue, and it's a miracle, but my people and people of post-Russia, whom we've been repeatedly mentioning so far, would play a key role in guaranteeing stability of this enormous region. Romanian philosopher Cioran said that empires do not get killed, they commit suicide. And Russia is about to commit such a horrendous act. But we must be fully prepared for that. Besides, it is important to notice that I and my organization concurs with Ruslan and the Bashkort people that so-called good Russians or representatives of liberal Russian movements do not represent all of the Russians. Although I am not tending to propagate criticism or stigma of those men and women, they have a right to express their feelings as they want. It is a matter of political reason to give us an opportunity to speak out loudly. Our voices must be heard. For many centuries, our identities were erased, and now in the process of restoration, only European community, European understanding of this problem shall prevail. And only by means of communication and support can we achieve such sublime goals like democracy and stability and justice and freedom for everybody. Last but not least, I'd like to point out to you that my people is a very unique European culture. We are the only Buddhist culture in Europe. We actually live in the lower Volga. And now I'd like to say a little prayer, a Buddhist prayer, for those men and women in Ukraine and all over the world who suffer and need relief. It's a really short one. Om tar tutare ture suha. Om tar tutare ture suha. Om tar tutare ture suha. This is called green. Oh, thank you. This called green Tara mantra. It's a mantra which would give us, all of us, happiness and relief and support all over the world. Long live free, just world. Thank you.
Now we have to choose among those who are remotely connected to this panel, and I call on Alexander Zolotarov of Don. Oh, sorry. So, wrong information. Sorry, but please take the floor.
First of all, I want to thank the organizers of this conference and the members of the European Parliament for possibility to speak there, because it's very important thing for our movement and for, I think, future of our people. I would like to start with one of the most important things for understanding, namely the identification of the main problem. The problem that led to the war going on now. The problem that has caused dozens of wars in the past and will cause dozens of wars in the future until this problem is not solved. And this problem is the imperial format of Russian statehood. Many Western politicians and so-called Russian opposition do not understand this problem, and they think that they can ensure security in Europe and bring prosperity in Russia just by simply removing Putin. But the problem is not Putin. His regime is just a new manifestation of this problem. A week ago was the 104th anniversary of the genocide of the Cossack people, during which hundreds of thousands of our tribesmen were killed. And this genocide was carried out by the Soviet regime. Also, the Russian Empire, as it expanded in size, new territories, carried out genocides of native peoples and began a total policy of Russification and assimilation, the destruction of the cultural and national identity of small peoples. This policy continued in the Soviet Union, and it still continues to this day. It is possible to make the Orange's assumption that the problem can be solved by establishment of a democratic regime in Moscow, while maintaining a unified Russian state. But there was already a historical experience of establishing such a regime. Under Yeltsin's rule, whom the West loved as the democratic president of Free Russia, a war began against the Chechen people. Under Medvedev, when the Russian Federation had not yet had time to finally transform into a totalitarian state, the war began against Georgia. The democratic regime in Moscow, even if it does have democratic institutions, it's always just a mask under which the imperial essence of this state is hidden. With the fall of the Putin regime, the problem will not be solved if Russian statehood is preserved in the imperial format. The problems of indigenous peoples will not be resolved. They will also be in the position of the oppressed under democratic power of Moscow, so-called. Many of them will cease to exist as ethnic groups if they do not revive or create their sovereign states in the near future. Europe, in this case, will get a new war in a few years or decades as soon as Russia accumulates enough forces to start this war. But I must also say that the West is also partly responsible for establishment of Putin's regime. In the 1990s, where the West helped Moscow to preserve the integrity of the Russian Empire within its current borders, the West recognized these borders. The West contributed to the concentration of the nuclear arsenal of the former Soviet Union in the hands of Moscow. The West did nothing when Russian tanks were driving through the territory of the Chechen Republic, through the territory of Georgia. The West bought from Russia natural resources stolen from indigenous peoples. The West allowed Putin to occupy Crimea. The effort to stop this activity or conduct the West allowed Russia to carry out its propaganda on the territory of the European Union and not effort to stop this activity or conduct counter-propaganda of the territory of Russia. And this is the reason why a lot of people now in Russia, common people, they support Putin and they really think that Europe is their enemy. Now the West paying for these mistakes, and also for these mistakes now paying Ukraine, but Ukrainian people pays for this by their own lives of their citizens. And I hope these mistakes will not be repeated in the future, because only in this case we will achieve freedom for indigenous peoples and security for all the Europe. Now I want to tell about our project of the state of Kosakia. If the Cossack people do not find the independent state in the coming years, they most likely will be no another chance for this. And our people will gradually decrease in number and lose their identity and will be assimilated by other peoples, by Russians. And therefore, only the revival of our state can save our people. Due to its geographical location, climate, resources, agriculture and industry, this state has every chance of being developed and prosperous. I would like to know the geopolitical importance of this region, which is the shortest road from Europe to Asia. Ancient trade routes passed here, and with the appearance of new states here, trade in this way can be resumed, which will be the benefit both for the local population and for the whole Europe. Also, in the perspective of post-Russia, the Don River will become the most important transport artery because it's connected by a canal with the Volga, which flows through the most of the future states of Idel-Urals and the present-day Central Russia, and also has access to the Caspian Sea. Through the Sea of Azov, the transportation of goods will go to the Black and Mediterranean seas and possibly even to the oceans. In the south, this region goes to the borders of Western Asia. Through the future states of the Kuban, Circassia and Northern Caucasus, there will also possibility for trade relationship. And there's one more thing I want to say. This is a joint appeal to the European Parliament from our movement and from our allied organization, All Cossacks Public Center. In the United States, on July 17, 1959, the Enslaved Nations Act number PL 8619 was passed. The law stated that the policy of the Communist Russia led to the enslavement and the deprivation of the national independence of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, Belarus, Armenia, Georgia, Turkestan, Azerbaijan, Idel-Ural, Kosakia and the other nations. That is, the Cossacks will recognize the right to be called people with the right to their own statehood and traditional self-government. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, almost all the peoples listed in this law gained independence. But the Kosakia specified in this legal act did not appear. And the Cossacks are still not recognized in Russian Federation as a people and are not included in the general classifier of the peoples of their country. Nevertheless, in Russia, on April 26, 1991, the law on the rehabilitation of repressed peoples was adopted, where among other nations it was said about the Cossacks and the obligation of the state to recognize the fact of illegal repression against them and to carry out legal, territorial and material rehabilitation. That is the obligation of the government to return the Cossacks people its full subjectivity and compensate for all that losses was announced. But for 32 years this law has not been implemented in the slightest, despite the numerous requests and demands of the Cossacks. Therefore, we, the Cossacks, appeal to the European Parliament with the request to adopt a resolution on the recognition of the Cossacks as people entitled to their own statehood with the establishment of the traditional broad Cossack self-government. And besides, in a short time, to apply the European Union member states to adopt legal acts similar to the American law PL 8690 in their countries. And at the end of my speech, I want to say that for our common victory, it is necessary to actively support the struggle of peoples for freedom at all levels. It is necessary to support the liberation movements with resources, media, information, money, recognition, legitimization, and if it will be necessary in the future, with the weapons. And of course, it is necessary to continue supporting Ukraine. The very fact that this conference is being held today within the walls of the European Parliament suggests that the West is beginning to realize its past mistakes, and it's necessary to continue working in this direction. We must achieve our common victory because we can't and you can't negotiate with Putin or any Russian imperial government. You can't succumb to their attempts to bribe Europe. You can't trust their promises. Only in this way will enslaved peoples gain freedom. Only in this way will the genocide be stopped. Only in this way peace will come to Europe, instead just a temporary truce. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Actually, I try to stay absolutely neutral as moderator, yet I'm also a witness of history to some extent. So I have to transfer part of my knowledge to add to your contribution. Well, we nations and countries of Central and Eastern Europe now within the EU and NATO are part, surely we consider ourselves part of the collective West. And it is us, together probably with the United States, pushing the rest of the West to help Ukraine in really intense manner. What is needed: arms, munition, money, technical assistance. Same, exactly the same, was done in 2008 when Russia invaded Georgia. Now we call war of Russia on Ukraine unprovoked and unjustified. At that time, majority of the West, that is true, tried to portray the invasion of Georgia as provoked by then President of Georgia and elites, and eventually, in silence, justified. There were 5 leaders of Central and Eastern Europe under full cooperation with the US President at that time, George W. Bush, President of Central and Eastern Europe, led by my late friend and boss, the late President Lech Kaczynski, with participation of the Ukrainian President as well, Viktor Yushchenko, going there and preventing eventual capturing of Tbilisi. Of course, it did not prevent capturing of 20% of Georgia, yet it was possible to rescue the most important things. President Saakashvili is now in prison in very dangerous state, and we have to defend him. 2 years after this war and trip of presidents to Tbilisi, President Kaczynski was dead. In Smolensk catastrophe, there is still silence around this. So remember, it's not only those who are not protected, but also protectors. God knows what's happening to them. So it's not, now we maintain with greater force, also in memory to the late President Lech Kaczynski, to exert more force probably, but alliance is the same and leaders are similar. Thank you. Well, I have some problems now with I think it is Mr. Florian Schur who has to take the floor as next. He represents what's officially called as Kaliningrad. I prefer to use Polish name, although I have nothing behind this. Just I like to put Polish in this. It's Królewiec.
Thanks, and I prefer the name Königsberg. Dear delegates of the Free Nations of Post-Russia Forum, my name is Florian Schur. I am historian and political activist from Germany. Today I'm representing Vadim Petrov, the coordinator of the Baltic Republican Party. In times of the upcoming end of the dictatorship in Russia, the Germans are also interested in the future of the Kaliningrad exclave, the former Königsberg region. Therefore, I will talk about what will happen after Putin, how to achieve decolonization and de-imperialization of the Königsberg region. The process of decolonization in Königsberg could start with ensuring free and fair elections for a multi-party government. This implies that liberal and progressive parties would be accepted again and given proper support in media space during the elections. Moreover, the EU could support the creation of a new think tank dealing with the democratization of the Königsberg region. For the purpose, charismatic politicians in Königsberg should be selected for a democratic rival government. A group of experts will teach those future democratic leaders the political skills by offering democratic workshops and developing a great strategy for the election campaigns. However, it's not enough for Russia to experience defeat in the Ukraine conflict while maintaining its imperialist ambitions. The situation would be similar to Germany's experience after World War I. A short period of disorder would be followed by a new revisionist regime that wants to retake the colonies. To avoid the risk of future wars and senseless bloodshed, the Kremlin must also come to terms with its imperial past. The post-war Königsberg should be marked by a process of coming to terms with the recent policy of extermination by the Russian colonial state and a moral renewal. Königsberg human rights NGOs could collect reports on war crimes in Ukraine by using a transitional justice system and make them available to international courts. In order to bring Russian soldiers from the Königsberg region to trial. The transitional justice system is based on 4 pillars. First, there is the right for truth. Russian colonial policy will only be supported by the majority of the Russians until their victimhood is questioned by the intellectuals. The post-Russia could take collective responsibility for present atrocities with a culture of remembrance towards colonialist victims of the Ukraine conflict by participating in the founding of an international reconciliation commission. Second, there is a right for justice. Supportive Königsberg journalists could inform about the international trials of Königsberg war criminals of the Ukraine conflict and make them available to a wide public. Third, there is a right for reparation. The rehabilitation of political prisoners of the Putin regime must be followed by gestures of apology for recent repression. Fourth, guarantee for non-repeat. After the successful establishment of a democratic city administration in Königsberg, the de-Putinization in the form of lustration and vetting will be inevitable for the followers and supporters of Russian imperialism, more particularly for the inner circle of the United Russia Party, the police and civil servants of the dictatorship. New democratic institutions should fight corruption based on human rights. There is a need for prosecution of Russian journalists who are guilty of hate speech during the Ukraine war. To ensure lasting peace in the region, demilitarization of the Samland is inevitable, turning the Pillar military zone into a public tourist port for docking cruise ships instead of warships. Furthermore, the Baltic Republican Party stands for alternative sources of solar and wind energy. Because the coal-fired power stations are damaging the Baltic ecosystem. In future, specialists of green energy business from EU could invest in a new European offshore enclave. Moreover, there could be European investments into the amber manufactory. As further action campaigns, Soviet street names could be symbolically renamed with new things, and Lenin statues could be covered. Finally, a referendum could be held for the renaming back of German cities and street names. The democratized institution could organize the removal of public symbols and monuments of Russian imperialism to the museums. For a further opening to the West, the new parliamentary democracy in Königsberg should then aim for open borders with its EU neighbors and determine the abolition of visas for EU citizens. The relaunch of a direct line of fast trains from Berlin to Königsberg would allow the EU to grow faster together. In addition, the reconstruction of all German city centers could be next target, as well as the return of the Orthodox converted German churches to the Protestant or Catholic Church. The long-term goal is regional autonomy in the form of a first Baltic state, in which the existing boundaries of the Königsberg region from 1992 remain unchanged, while the area experiences local self-government. Yes. Instead of a repressive centralized power structure. Therefore, a new democratic governor of the Königsberg region should first proclaim independence from the Kremlin and in the next step confirm with a referendum, as the Baltic states did before in the 90s. The new Baltic Republic without EU borders could be integrated with neighboring European countries like Lithuania, Poland, Germany into the common economic space with the euro currency. In a distant future, when all the conditions for entry have been fulfilled, the BIP party could start the process for EU and NATO membership. Decentralization and decolonization would transform the remaining heartland of the Russian Federation into a controllable democratic state that no longer needs to engage in expansionist wars to preserve its empire. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to once more to a remote participant, Mrs. Raisa Zolotaryeva of Saha, now a refugee living in Poland, I understand. Please. I think you are muted still. Well, do we have solution to this? I'm sorry. May I ask staff to look into this? Okay, so I try to call next person. Is Mr. Dmitry Kuznetsov present? Yeah. Please start.
Первым делом я хочу поблагодарить организаторов.
First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the forum for giving us the floor. In 2023, see less and less people living in Karelia, and we can see that the policy of Bolshevism continues, where Stalin made Gulag from our country. So a lot of people were killed on our territory, and those people who were not killed, they had to flee, or they were evacuated by Finnish people. The neutralization of the indigenous people, we could see it that people actually had to be relocated to Siberia, and in the framework of the large-scale Kremlin project, thousands of families was brought from Belarus and Ukraine to our land. Our main goal is not to allow in the future for this tragedy to be repeated, the genocide of the indigenous people of Karelia. And the main goals of our activities are the following: is to unite Karels and other peoples of Karelia around the idea of restoring our independence in the framework of the independent Karelia state, and creation of the independent government, the first government, as the government that will continue the work of the government that was created a long time ago and before holding the elections in the independent Karelia. After getting the independence, our movement, and then, for some time, from 1917, 1920, we were part of this free movement of the independence, and now we'd like to get back to the European structures, and we would like to get self-determination, to popularize of our self-identification after a long-term genocide of our peoples, after a long-term occupation that is being carried out on the territory of Karelia by the Russian authorities. Like to develop the most important organizational and program documents, policy document that will be a foundation of the future state. And the carrying out of these goals is impossible without attracting attention of the international community to our problems. Karel National Unit appeals to you to help us to carry out all this, and we need to create conditions to create local economy and democratic institutions, and of course would like to become a part of the Schengen zone in the future, part of the EU and NATO. Karelia is composed of different indigenous people, and one of these are Pomors. And here I make an appeal from Pomorska Sloboda from, if we translate it from this language, it is freedom. So they would like to get an autonomy inside of the independent Karelia. And our main goal is to continue to promote this Pomor project. Pomors and Karels are linked by history. We're one of the indigenous people of Karelia with almost the same culture as Karels. We have same traditions, and we have a lot of family links. And the Pomor project is recitation of our way of living, which is based on the ancient traditions of living together. And Pomors are an independent indigenous people that also suffered by the authoritarian Moscow rule. So these people lived in Arctic, and they're trying to erase us. And here at the European Parliament, we make the appeal of the international community to our problem, and we ask you to help us to free Pomor people. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. It gives certainly great pleasure to listen to this. My constituency in Poland is called Pomorie as well, because I think that many of us living on seashore call to our territories like this, Pomorze. It was traditional. Thank you. Is Mr. Ahmed Ozdo of Ingushetia connected to us remotely? Yeah, we hear partly. Okay.
Schönen guten Tag, liebe Damen und Herren. Доброго дня всем присутствующим.
Hello to all of you. Sorry, the connection is very bad. We're trying to do our best. I'd like to attract your attention to the chaos that is going on in Russia, and our decision to declare the independence is not linked only with what is going on today, but also based on what happened during these 2 centuries of the Russian occupation of the Russian Empire, the USSR, and then the Russian Federation. For all these years, the English people were under a lot of stress, and we were taxed a lot, and our taxes were much higher than those peoples that lived around us. Regularly, the legislation was getting tougher and tougher. There were pogroms, ethnical pogroms, and the villages were burned. And in Gush, a lot of them had to flee to Turkey, and it was going on till the revolution of 1917. Bolsheviks overthrew this damn Tsarist regime and promised freedom for the Highlanders, and they helped Bolsheviks and have lost a lot of people, and Bolshevik kept their word less than 10 years just before Stalin came, who was efficiently fighting against religion, and then he took our autonomy, our state, and killed intelligentsia and entrepreneurial and political elite of the country. And then he sent all of the Ingush and Chechens to Gulag. And 13 years after they came back, and they couldn't even get back to their native villages, and Ossetians were not getting, didn't allow us to come back. And this new owners, they did everything, in order for people to forget about us. Even from administrative point of view, some of the villages were not returned to us, and people couldn't go back to the highland villages. And Ingush can come back to their native villages by receiving a special pass from the occupants. The perestroika was a revolution, and Chechnya has declared its independence, and the USSR was disintegrated. Chechnya stayed in the Russian Federation and trusted Yeltsin and Russians, and he made promises in 1991 in Ingushetia. But they didn't keep their promises. In 1992, the Russian army has carried out ethnic cleansing of the local people, which they called lately Ossetian-Ingush conflict. Even if Ossetian were just helping the regular armed forces of the Russian Federation, and the Russian army used artillery, aviation, and bombarded peaceful villages. And all these inhuman acts, because of this, 70,000 Ingush people became refugees, and there are other people still missing. No one actually was made responsible for this, and this one of the responsible, Sergei Shoigu, is now the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, one of the people who actually is responsible for this, and he continues his work in Ukraine. And after all these years of corruption and of this war, of killing of our tradition, Kremlin is carrying out a new aggressive occupational war.
And now they're mobilizing thousands of Ingush people into the regular army, but we've done nothing bad to our neighbor state, Ukraine. We believe that we shouldn't die there for the simple fact that they don't use Russian language, because in our own land we've almost forgotten our mother tongue. Our children can't study in it. During those times of imperial tyranny, during the most inhumane tortures by the imperial regime, we are lacking patience, and we are not hoping for any changes in Kremlin. We are free of this illusion, so we should say to Russia and to the whole world, we don't want Kremlin on our land anymore, and we call upon all the enslaved nations to break out from this prison of people. We want freedom, we want peace, and we don't want other people's lands for Russia. Let Allah help us.
Dankeschön. Vielen, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much indeed. Now I would like to give the floor to Marina Kalaeva, representing Buryatia.
Sambeno. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Marina. I'm from Buryatia. Buryats are the native people of the territories around Lake Baikal. We are the most numerous native people of Siberia and the only people in Siberia that had our own written history and literature before Russian colonization. Buryatia was part of the Mongolian world and an important part of the international trading system of Central and East Asia. In the 19th centuries, after 138 years of bloody war, Buryats were occupied by Russia. Buryats went through forced Christianization, which had a traumatic effect on the entire population. All attempts of organized resistance were harshly punished. Entire villages were slaughtered, women and children were forced into slavery. In the era of the Russian Empire, Buryatia became a place of mass settlement of Russian peasants and had a huge number of prisons. In Soviet times, so-called collectivization destroyed thousands of families. Buddhist works on philosophy, medicine, and astrology, and Buryatia's great Buddhist heritage were destroyed as well. In the USSR, there were more than 150 Buddhist monasteries and 23,000 monks. After repressions of 1930s, only 600 monks left. About 20,000 representatives of the Buryat intelligentsia were executed. In the 1930s, the Kremlin officially replaced the Buryat writing system with the Cyrillic alphabet. Buryats were killed just for speaking their own language or studying in monasteries. In 1937, Buryatia was divided into 5 parts. Buryatia lost 40% of the ethnic Buryat population, and ethnic Russians became the majority. In the 1970s, the Buryat language was completely banned in schools, and generations of Buryats grew up not knowing their own language. I'm one of them. In 2020, changes were made to the Russian constitution, making Russian the only state language of Buryatia. The goal has been to accelerate Russification of Buryats and change the ethnic composition of the region. Buryatia has not recovered from these events. According to UNESCO report, Buryat language is an endangered language and can disappear completely by year of 2050. Russia is unable to build a federation. Russia's republics are actually colonies. Russian power in the colonized republics is maintained by 3 factors. First, corruption. Corrupt local elites who control local politics in the republic under the supervision of the Kremlin and maintain pro-Russian agenda. Second, violence. Dozens of national activists, politicians, and journalists are imprisoned or killed by FSB. The survivors leave Russian territory. Third, propaganda. Truthful journalism is destroyed. History taught in schools is designed to raise Buryat children to become patriots of Russian metropole. In 1992, puppet representatives signed a federal treaty with Russia, and Buryatia joined the Russian Federation without a real consent of Buryat people. Russia remains a dictatorship which has decided to finally resolve the issue of native people. The invasion into Chechen Republic and the genocide organized there in the point where the empire was reborn. At the same time, Russia has been actively pursuing a formal policy of depriving native people of their territories. In 2008, 2 Buryat autonomous districts, Uсть-Orda and Taginsky, were decommissioned by Moscow. Russian government is racist and chauvinistic. Native people in Russia experience colossal level of racism. In Moscow and other Russian cities like St. Petersburg, it is very difficult to rent an apartment or find a job for a person of non-Slav appearance. Bullying in schools, assaults, and racially motivated murders are common in Russia. If crime is committed by non-Slavs, then this will be emphasized in the news reports. Nazism has become the de facto state ideology of Russia, and this is widely supported by the population. Many Slavic Russians believe in their civilizational superiority over neighboring people. This brought us to a full-scale chauvinistic war in Ukraine. Russia uses native people as cannon fodder. For Buryat, the probability of being mobilized and dying in the Ukraine war is 275 times higher than for residents of Moscow or St. Petersburg. There is no Russian gas, there is no Russian oil or Russian diamonds. All these are resources extracted from the land of native people. Billions of dollars go to finance Russia's imperial projects, from the sale of Khanty-Mansiysk oil, Yakutian diamonds, Buryat gold, or uranium. Every year, millions of hectares of Siberian forests are burned down, a large part of which is the result of arson. A village in the Shoria region was burned down after a Russian company found large deposits of coal. Lake Baikal is the main symbol of the Buryat people. Lake Baikal is the largest freshwater reserve on the planet, and it's suffering an ecological catastrophe. This is caused by Russian legislation, and this is leading to irreversible environmental consequences affecting the entire world. Native people are being robbed by Moscow corporations. Buryats and other people live in poverty primarily because of the unfair distribution of taxes between colonies and the metropole. 40 to 70% of natural resources taxes go to Moscow. Corporations using corruption and schemes avoid paying significant part of their taxes to colonies. Activists from Buryatia have founded an independence movement. The mission is to unite Buryat people around the idea of freedom and independence. We want to build an independent democratic state that will protect the interests of all the people of Buryat Republic, regardless of their race, religion, or any other differences. Captive nations need your support. The only way is independence. To do this, we must educate new free-thinking leaders. We need to train professionals and specialists who will ensure the prosperity, development, and security of the new Buryat state. They will bring new values to our oppressed and brainwashed society. We are determined. We are ready to act. We urge the European Parliament to meet and discuss our further cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marina. It was a very powerful message, certainly. Now I understand that Mrs. Raisa Zubareva-Saka is available on remote connection. Hello?
Добрый день.
Good afternoon. My name is Larisa Zubareva. I'm from Sakha. I am the founder of Free Yakutia Foundation. During different anti-war manifestations, we have to explain to Russians in Russia why we, people of Sakha, think that we are a colony of the Russian Federation. We need to explain what's wrong with the Russian state. And here it's an honor for me to speak in this group of experts. Thank you for this honor. There are several anti-war movements. For example, Free Buryatia Foundation. We proclaimed 2023 as the year of decolonization. And I'm not speaking about military action, about violence. No. We state that our lands haven't acceded to the Russian Federation by vote, but they were captured by the Russian Federation against the will of the people. And we want justice to be restored. We are quite tired of those empty talks. And, well, I'll be very direct. Those who are in power think that they are superior to all of us from their own childhood. Well, I'm not speaking about everyone, but the majority are like this. So we have to start from scratch. We have to explain everything. And it's not only about ordinary people, it's also important to explain this to those Russians who are quite liberal, to those who are historians. And, well, history can't be taught without emotions. We can't learn about our historical experience from a distance. I'll give you an example. Evenk people, well, they need morses, they need natural resources. It's more important for them than Navalny, etc. For them, natural resources are of utmost importance. And maybe, well, all those empty talks can become a sort of a tug of war. We try to prove Moscow who is more victimized. Are those Russians who lived in Sakha, Yakutia victims, or are we, the indigenous people of Sakha, the victims? I believe that we should talk what was the influence of colonization on the people, on everyone. We need to ask ourselves, why are we silent? Why are we afraid? Even those who are abroad, even those who were born in the 90s, why are we afraid? Is it new Kremlin policy? They consider everyone to be an enemy, or is it a reaction to Stalinism? If we don't understand the nature of this feeling, we can't fight it, and I believe everyone understands it. Also, we need to show concrete examples of colonization. We need to talk about our national histories during the First and the Second World Wars, in the 90s, in the years 2000. We need to talk about it to our own peoples, and we should look for different ways to find a cure from our fear. Well, I don't know about the situation in other lands of Russia, whether they have proven facts of colonization and of genocide. Well, I think, well, as in Sakha, those are hypotheses, mostly. In 1632, Sakha became part of Russia, and the world community hasn't recognized that it was an act of violence. If we manage to prove that it was a violent annexation, then we can make use of international mechanisms. We can proclaim that we don't want to be a part of the Russian Federation any longer. And to end my speech, I would like to add, the civilized world should understand, if Ukraine loses this war, it would not simply be Kremlin's triumph. It will be a triumph for the Russian Empire. And it will mean the end for the peoples of Russia. Those who don't want to be assimilated, those who don't want to be Russians, will be called Nazis and will be punished. All of us, our men, our women, we will be annexed by the Kremlin. And everyone should understand it. World politicians should be aware of it. And in this case, we will be able to make decisions on our own future. Well, that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Now I would like to give the floor to Dmitry Bereshkov, representing the International Center of Committee of Indigenous Peoples of Russia.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I will speak in Russian.
My name is Dmitry Bereshkov. I am from Kamchatka, represent the Ilmen people, and here I represent the International Committee of Indigenous Peoples of Russia. It's a new organization. It was created in March 2022 after Russian invasion in Ukraine. We created this organization to unite the efforts of the indigenous peoples. I represent indigenous peoples from the north and from the Far East of Russia, and we want to express ourselves against this war. Our peoples are very small. Our difference from other peoples of Russia is the following one. Russia recognizes that we are indigenous peoples, according to Russian legislation. If there is a people of less than 50,000 representatives, it's an indigenous peoples, and we are 47 in Russia in total. I don't want to speak about colonization. Other speakers have already spoken about it. The main problem of our people is access to territory, because our peoples have managed to preserve traditional ways of life, reindeers, hunting, etc. That's the basis of our economy. Indigenous peoples live in many regions of Russia, in Khanty-Mansiysk, in Chukotka, in Kamchatka. I am from Kamchatka myself, in Murmansk region, etc. We have made a count. Half of Russia's territory is inhabited by them. Well, we are nomadic people quite often. Sometimes, we can be very small. Some peoples have, Ilmen, we are 2,000 in Kamchatka. So, but as those peoples are nomadic, they occupy huge spaces. Why did Russian Kazakhs invaded those territories? Of course, it was an example of classic colonization. Well, those Kazakhs wanted to hunt furs, because selling furs, it was gold for the 18th century. And from the 20th century, our regions were very important for the Russia, because we have oil, gold, etc. And, all those resources are very important for the Russian budget. Our problem is indigenous peoples business and state authorities want to share the same territory. We need this territory for hunting, for fishing, and for reindeer breeding. But state and business need this territory for extracting oil, for promoting tourism, etc., for business. And that's the contradiction. We want to have the same territory, but for us, it is important to use those territories in a sustainable way, and the state wants this territory to extract money, and all the environmental factors are just secondary. And it is a big problem. We've always had it, even during the Soviet times and after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But when the war against Ukraine started, those contradictions have become quite acute. I think many of us have heard that there are more mobilized soldiers in the regions than in big cities, in Moscow, for example. And we've recently got a message that in Gvasugi, it's a village in Khabarovsk, they drafted 14 people. Well, 14 people, it's not a lot, but it's 11% of all the men in this village. It's a small village. So, if we use official figures, it's 30% of all mobilized men they need. So those are huge numbers, quite different from official figures given by Shoigu and Putin. We also see that ecological standards have become more relaxed. State wants money, they don't want to pay attention to the environment. We are very anxious about it. We see that there are no more independent environment organizations in Russia, no more independent media, no one can help us anymore. I can give you lots of examples. I'll give you just one. We have a case in court against a reindeer breeder who is in conflict with an oil production company. And a few years ago, it was a very strong case which attracted attention from the world media, but now everyone is ignoring it. There is no more Western business in Russia. It's a problem for us because Russian or Chinese business don't pay attention to international standards for environment and for indigenous people's rights. International standards and international law is a key factor for our survival, not only in Russia, but in the whole world, in Latin America, in Africa, etc. We have Article 69 in our Constitution, which was proposed by the representatives of indigenous peoples in the 90s. And according to this article, Russia should respect indigenous peoples' rights and make use of international standards in this regard. But of course, Russian state isn't doing it. But we want to have access to territory. It's important for us to hunt or to fish. We need our traditional resources, and also we need to have the right in decision making. For example, if the state wants to build an oil factory or a road in our territory, indigenous peoples should have a say in this project. And if they don't participate in this project, it means that our rights are violated. So, self-determination for us, it's a very important issue, and of course we support every indigenous people in self-determination up to creation of an independent state. It's quite normal. Take, for example, Greenland. They have opted for this way, but it's a very difficult path, and we need to have resources. We need to take a lot of factors into account: geography, economy, national composition of the population. For example, our small peoples, small indigenous peoples of Russia, well, we can't have independence because we don't have enough people. In Murmansk region, well, we had a representative from there. They have Sami people. They are 700,000 people and altogether, and Sami represent less than 1%. So the idea of Sami independence for us, it's quite problematic. So self-determination for us is important. We want to have a say in big national projects, but in one way or another, we'll live in some country, in some state, even if we have new states on the Russian territory. We will still live there if we have, for example, independent Yakutia, but indigenous peoples will be there. We will represent a small minority. So for us, it is still important to have access to territory. It is important for us to make our rights respected, and we want to have a dialogue. So thank you, the organizers of this conference, for this dialogue. And Ukraine's victory in this war is crucial, because without Ukraine's victory, Russian Empire will exist for many more years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now I would like to invite Rafis Kashapov to take the floor. He represents Idel Ural and is Deputy Prime Minister of the independent Tatarstan.
Dear Madam Chair, he is not available right now, and he asked me to read his statement. I'm sorry to speak again.
Okay.
Thank you. Appeal to the heads of states of the European Union. Moscow has been pursuing an active policy of conquest for many centuries, colossally expanding its territories, occupying the lands of the Idel Ural, Caucasus, Siberia, the Far East, and other regions. Because of the policy of genocide, 13 peoples have already disappeared from ethnographic map of Russia, and several dozen peoples are on the verge of extinction. Today in Russia, there is a rapid decline in the number of Tatars. The scope of the native language is narrowing due to the Kremlin's ethnocide policy. According to the results of the 2021 census, the number of Tatars in Russia decreased by 600,000 people. The number of Tatar speakers in Russia decreased by 2 million over 20 years. This is the result of forced Russification. But today we, Tatars, are still the second largest people in Russia. We have 5.5 million people according to the 2010 census, only in Russia. And for other small-numbered peoples, the situation is more tragic. To reveal the essence of the policy of genocide of the colonized peoples by Moscow, I cite tragic historical facts in the Caucasus. As a result of 2 wars in the territory of Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, more than 250,000 peaceful Chechen residents died in the hands of at the hands of Russian invaders, of which more than 42,000 were children under 13 years old. At the time of the start of the war by Russia, Ichkeria was a separate independent state. Why didn't the world community pay attention to the genocide against the Chechens in those years? In the future, due to the inaction of the UN, the EU and NATO, the world received international armed conflicts between Russia and Georgia, Russia and Syria, Russia and Ukraine. That's why today the colonized peoples who are on the verge of extinction have entered the arena of struggle for their national religious rights and are waiting for help from international community. But there are also positive historical events for us. We remember March 24th, 1999, one of the largest NATO operations in the modern history of mankind began in Yugoslavia. The operation involved 19 NATO members countries, led by the United States. The bombing continued from March to June. It all started with the fact that Serbian military committed massacres of Albanians in Kosovo. The Albanians of Kosovo are internally grateful to NATO, which expelled Serbian troops, police and administration from Kosovo. Thus, at present, the small Republic of Kosovo has been recognized by 111 UN member states. After all, when Kosovo declared independence, many countries declared that they would not recognize it. In those years, the West and the Kosovo Albanians coordinated all actions. Using the Kosovo Albanians as an example, I suggest that the countries of the European Union cooperate in the same format with representatives of the colonized peoples of Russia. For this, we have the Forum for the Free Peoples of Post-Russia, which can contact the relevant structures of the EU if necessary. According to the latest census, 1.7 million people live in the Republic of Kosovo. There are more than 4 million people in Bashkortostan. There are more than 4 million people in Tatarstan. The Chechen Republic has 1.5 million people. There are more than 1 million people in the Kaliningrad region, and there are still many national republics and outskirts in Russia that are in need of international assistance. We, the representatives of the colonized peoples, hope that after the start of the war in Ukraine and the failures of the Russian troops, that the future defeat of Russia will inevitably lead to its disintegration. For this, a simple parallel. Roughly, the same thing happened to the Soviet Union after the defeat in the Cold War. Dear heads of the states of the European Union, we ask you to provide information and financial assistance for the Forum of Free Peoples of Post-Russia, which sets itself the task of building independent national democratic states. Sincerely yours, Rafiz Kashapov, Deputy Prime Minister of the Government of Independent Tatarstan in Exile, one of the co-founders of the Free Idle Ural movement. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, it's the first time I read the text, so...
No problem, you did it very well. Okay. Give me just a second, because there is slight confusion about who is to take the floor. I think it is Julia. Sorry. The next person to take the floor is Julia Faktarazova. Yes, she was expected.
Здравствуйте. Юлия Файзрахманова.
Julia Fazrahmanova.
Can you take? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Julia Fazrahmanova. I'm an activist, a journalist, and a positioner from the Republic of Tatarstan. And here I will read out the call of Farid Zakiev, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us. I'm representing the oldest Tatarstan organization who defends the language, the culture, and who wants the colonization. Dear participants of the conference, we have a beautiful language, and our statehood has more than thousands of years, and we are the inheritance of the horde, and we have less and less people. Our number decreased by 600,000 people. The number of people who speak Tatar language has fallen, has dropped by 2.7 million people, and the education in the Tatar language was destroyed. Russia has forbidden to learn Tatar language in Tatarstan. We have just one language dominating, which is Russian language. Our statehood has been destroyed. On August 30th, 1999, a declaration about the sovereignty of the Republic of Tatarstan was adopted. In 1992, the referendum was carried out about the state status of Tatarstan, And the question that was raised was the following: do you agree that the Tatar Republic is a subject of the international law? And the referendum, people said yes, majority said yes, and the constitution then was adopted, the constitution of an independent state. But starting from 2022, destruction of our statehood was being launched. The constitution was unlawfully changed, and the words being a subject of the Russian Federation appeared in this constitution. And then there was an agreement that was signed in 2007, a decorative agreement that was signed, but 7 years later, Russia unilaterally stopped respecting this agreement. The Constitutional Court was also closed to Tatarstan in January 23. The State Council of Tatarstan, under pressure of the Russian Federation, has adopted amendments that made that the Tatarstan became stopped being an independent, an autonomous region, and dozens of young Tatars are being killed every day during the war. Officially, the numbers are much lower. We say that it's a genocide of the Tatar people. I think that in order to save our people from the total destruction, annihilation, in order to save us, we need to create a Tatar state against forced Russification. In his appeal, in our appeal, we ask us to recognize the independence and the state language of the Republic of Tatarstan based on the referendum of 1992. We will make this appeal to different member states of the EU, and we ask for the help of the MEPs in this framework. Moreover, I would like to add a couple of words from myself. Russia is an imperial country. It's not only its history, but it's also its today's situation. And this is how Vladimir Putin sees his country. I heard it from himself, personally, in person. Several years ago, I was at the meeting, Vladimir Putin meeting with journalists, and he was asked why he's not taking care of internal Russian problems. And I'm almost quoting him over here. I want, as emperors of the past, to get more territory for the Russia. And that means that at the time he saw himself as an emperor. Then I went to Kiev as a journalist. I saw different fighters from different battalions in a war hospital, military hospital in Kiev. I saw people who were on Maidan. And what I saw, what differs a lot of Ukrainians and Russians, it's internal dignity and freedom. This is something that Putin is afraid of. And people who are free, Putin kills them. He puts them in prison. I remember oppositioners in Kazan. In 2022, we helped to flee persecution, some of them. We helped to find money for the lawyers, for those who couldn't flee, who didn't have time to get away from Russia. There are less and less people, free people in Kazan. And now all of them are under pressure or being persecuted or live in difficult conditions outside Russia. And now, after the end of the war, there will be another problem. Those who now know how to kill civilians, they will get back to the national republics. They have blood on their hands, blood of people who they killed in Kherson, in Bucha, and other cities. And these people will get back to their national regions. Some of them will bring arms. That's why I think it's important to do two things when we talk about post-colonial Russia. And I'm not going to talk not as an activist, but also as a woman and as a mother. I think the first important thing to do is to inculcate democratic values, tolerance, all of those who live in Russia. Because otherwise we will not get a new democratic states, but some kind of Iran with LGBT people being killed, with women getting killed, women who want to fight violence. If we don't want this, we need to create potential for democratic development. Of course, the national, ethnical, but also democratic. And the second thing is to create a Tatar national battalion to fight on the Ukrainian side. Tatarstan needs people who know how to fight, who know what it is, what it takes to fight for the most important, for the freedom and dignity. Thank you. Thanks for your attention and thanks for giving me the floor. On behalf of, I'm also saying this on behalf of Mr. Zakiev. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for this very important statement. I have only one remaining speaker in this panel. It is Maxim Kuzakmetov of Ingria. But maybe I have to ask also staff eventually, are there any speakers added, yes, to this panel as well? But later on, please, Maxim Kuzakmetov.
I'll speak Russian.
My name is Maxim Kuzakmetov. I was born and I lived all my life in St. Petersburg. I left my home city less than a year ago. I don't want to have anything to do with this fascist state. I didn't want to talk about Ingria, which will be free. And St. Petersburg will receive it, and needs to receive its independence and become a compact European state. Of course, Russia will lose the war. Will liberate these territories. Maybe we'll agree to pay contributions and maybe we'll agree to demilitarize, but it will not save Europe from another invasion. In 1918, Europe has went through this process. When Germany was demilitarized, there were free and democratic elections, and Germany needed to pay a huge contribution, and would like to attract your attention to the fact that it was decolonized because Germany had colonies in Africa and Asia with a much bigger territory than its own than Germany actually. And what happened then? Several years after that, revanchist ideas, Nazi ideas, made this new war full of blood and Holocaust because allies, they just left this country alone. They were happy with the defeat of Germany, they were happy with the agreement that was signed, and exactly the same thing could happen to Russia because this imperial poison, this sense of superiority, the years of enslavement, of slavery, make that people in Russia will feel like this, and former army members, this revanchist ideas, they will win these democratic elections, and millions of people will support this imperial idea, even if after the defeat some of the parts of today's Russian Federation will become independent. So in order to avoid this new invasion, it is needed to dismantle Russia, different occupational areas. So this, in 1918, we should have done the same thing that what happened in 1945, when the victors not only forced to capitulate, but left their military bases over there, which are still there, by the way, and under control. There were Nuremberg process that was organized, and they did it in Germany, where there was a parliament, there were democratic institutions, and even there, even in Germany, this imperial feeling was still there. I think Ukrainians understand very well what I'm saying over here. I think in Baltic countries, in Poland, I'm understood pretty well, but I'm not sure I will be understood in Germany and in France. If Putin says tomorrow, okay, we're sorry, we're leaving the territory, we're ready to pay the contribution, and people will applaud him. He will get a Nobel Prize, the Peace Prize. But, well, the first time the Russian Empire was dismantled was 1917, but then the Soviet Union was created, and it happened again. And then 15 states were created after the Soviet Union, and just after that, two wars in Chechnya were carried out, then was Georgia, then was Syria, and now we have Ukraine. So, in brief, as a conclusion, here in the European Union, people need to start thinking clearly. So it will take some time for the new generation to grow up under external control, external management. Otherwise, Russia will restart its aggression against anyone, even against themselves. So now, to close this colonization subject, another internal example, invasion of Novgorod, the biggest, the richest city of Russia in the Middle Ages. Was the best region, and then the first conquest, and then people were deported, were killed in Novgorod, and then other people were brought over there. And so this is about the conquest and colonization, and millions of people know about that, and for a lot of people, the only criterion is whether if the country grows. I mean, it means that the emperor is good, and there's nothing that you can actually get rid of in a year or two. You need an external management, and you need an external help. Thanks for your attention.
To conclude this extremely interesting panel presentation of a variety of views, but first of all, a very loud, powerful, and important voice of nations of Russia. What we share, all of us, is of course the future and thoughts about future of war in Ukraine, aggressive war of Ukraine, that it is absolutely necessary, inevitable for all of us, for both the collective West and free nations of Russia, that Ukraine wins this war. And secondly, surely for many of us, certainly in certain Central and Eastern Europe, the appeal for liberty, for freedom, liberty and independence is extremely powerful, and we understand it certainly very well. Now time has come for the fourth and last panel. It will be moderated by Vice President of the European Parliament, our colleague of Latvia, Robert Zīle. Please, we have to rearrange the podium quickly.
Dear colleagues, honorable participants of the conference, if you can take your seats, I would appreciate very much. and we will continue. We have some delays, but let's use our time for the last panel as good as possible. If somebody would like to speak to each other, perhaps you can do it outside of the room. Colleagues. Colleagues, please take your seats, those who would like to listen to this panel. So I will already introduce me, but I will do it again. I'm Robert Zile, Vice President of the European Parliament, and I'm from Latvia. I can say that I really have an honor to moderate this Western policy towards Russia beyond the status quo. This is the title of our panel, and I think it's. I just would like to say that. What does it mean beyond the status quo, where we are speaking to in a framework of this conference? I remember from late 80s, Western democracies, when Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, other countries wanted to regain their own independence. Most of Western democracies didn't want to destroy Soviet Union, let's be honest. So until 87, 88, but then it's collapsed because all those former occupied countries who lost their independence were very strong with a different kind of activities, and we succeeded also with recognition from Western democracies. I think it's important to understand in the framework of this conference how our panelists will see this, what will happen with a situation after Ukraine war will end with a victory for Ukraine, and how it looks like a victory of Ukraine. How does it mean how Russia will looks like, and how Western democracies will behave. I think it's important point what I would like all panelists to think and to also to say to you. I ask all the panelists to stay in 10 minutes framework around, and then perhaps we will have about 20 minutes to additional information, what we would like to react on some of other speakers. Let's do our best, and I would like to introduce, I really have a great honor to introduce the first speaker, Edward Lucas. Lucas is a non-resident senior fellow of the Center of European Policy Analysis, but until 2018 he was editor of The Economist. He still would write for columns for The Times, for Daily Mail, and also he was an editor for Standpoint magazine. And of course, in my country, for example, Edward Lucas is very well known Central Eastern European expert, and with many followers actually in social network as well. So Edward, floor is yours. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, and thank you to the organisers. Putting on these conferences is a huge amount of work, and much of it happens behind the scenes. I think the whole idea of a status quo is very questionable, because these problems are not new. They're really old, and it's only in the countries of the Old West that people suddenly come to look at a problem and think this is a new problem. If it's new, it's because you haven't been paying attention. We have already heard a very eloquent mention of the Captive Nations resolution of 1959, and I want to commend the colleague for raising that, because this is one of the ur-texts of this discourse, when the United States Congress put on the record that the countries behind the Iron Curtain, the nations, are captive. This is not just an ideological struggle between communism and the free world, though it was. It's also an imperial project, just as it was under the Tsarist Empire, and just as it is now under Putin. And it's interesting to look at that list of captive nations, because it was quite an odd selection. Cossacia is there, which is great. Idir-Ural is there, which is great. But there are some other notable absences. So it was just a starting point. But I still commemorate Captive Nations Week, and I think that we should use Captive Nations Week, which is still there. It's a law in America. The White House has to to mark it in the third week of July. So let's all start planning now for what we're going to do to make something of Captive Nations Week. We can encourage our American friends to talk to the White House to make sure that President Biden's declaration says something meaty and interesting. We can have events for Captive Nation Week, but it's a thing. It's a great peg for us to hang our activities on. I'm also really aware of the number of times that people warned us in the Old West, going right back to the late 80s and early 90s, about the threat of Soviet/Russian imperialism. And we made a huge mistake in the Old West in 1980, 1991, because we thought three things had happened, and actually only two things had happened. We thought the communist system of economic planning had collapsed, and indeed it did, though that collapsed well before 1991. We thought the Soviet Communist Party's monopoly of power collapsed, and it did, although that also happened before 1991 with the quasi-free elections. And there was a third thing that we thought happened in 1991, and that was the end of the Soviet Empire. But that was a mistake. It didn't end. It got smaller, which was great. It put on new clothes, which was less good. But it's still there. And my friend and colleague Bruce Clark wrote a book about this in 1995 called The Empire's New Clothes. And it didn't go down very well. He was looking at exactly the problems we have now, the Chechen War, the fetishization of the victory in 1945, militarization, the role of the FSB, Russian chauvinism towards indigenous and minority languages, and so on. He had it all there in his book. I wrote my book, The New Cold War, which came out in 2008. People say I was prescient, and people like Roberts have been very kind in helping me promote it. But nothing I said was new. It was all there already, but we weren't listening. I don't know if there are any Estonians in the room, but your president, Lennart Meri, gave a speech in 1994 in Hamburg about the danger of the Karaganov doctrine and of Russian imperialism. And he gave this speech to an international conference. The leader of the Russian delegation got up and walked out of the room in protest. Does anyone here, I wonder, know who the leader of that Russian delegation was in Hamburg in December 1994? Well, I'll give you a clue. He was from the St. Petersburg municipality. He was the head of the Foreign Economic Relations Committee of the St. Petersburg municipality. His name was Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. So this goes back a long way, if we care to look. But what do we do now? 30 years too late, after so many people have died, not just the hundreds of thousands died and maimed in Ukraine, but also the people who've died in conflicts in Ingushetia, as we heard, in Chechnya, as we've heard, or the people who've been beaten up and imprisoned and crippled and traumatized by the Russian imperial machine in so many other places. Well, I'm stunned by the lack of strategic thinking about Russia. We don't know what the outcome of the war is. There's a small and horrible possibility that Russia somehow wins. There's a much bigger possibility of some kind of stalemate or frozen conflict. I still think by far the most likely outcome is that Russia loses. But whatever kind of post-war Russia we get, we're going to have really serious problems. One extreme, there will be triumphalism. That will be disastrous. But there's also more likely, I think, to be a kind of post-1918 Germany scenario with the Dolchstoss legenda, the idea that Russia was stabbed in the back. They tried to denazify Ukraine and somehow the West tricked them and now they've lost. Now, I don't know how that will play out for Putin. I suspect Putin will go sooner rather than later, but we will be dealing with a extremely angry and resentful Russian elite with strong desire to get back what it's lost, and probably a lot of disorder as well. I'm not talking so much about the ethnic, linguistic, regional geographical fault lines. We've heard a lot about that today already. I'm more worried about the fault lines between the different mafia clans. Many of you here will know the work of Andrei Piontkovsky. I commend his latest analysis from Washington, where he says the Russian Civil War has already started, with every tycoon, every business group building its national army, not just the Wagner group, which we hear so much about, and the Kadyrovtsi, but also, who knew here that Timchenko, Gennady Timchenko, has his own private army, Redut? And I was also amazed to learn that Shoigu has his private military company, Patriot, and there are others too. So these processes are already underway, and no one in the West is prepared for them. So I am deeply dismayed by the lack of strategic thinking, but I commend particularly those in Lithuania and elsewhere who've started thinking about this. It's really important to get the discussion going. What can we do? Well, one thing is build capacity. How many diplomats do we have in the West who speak Tatar or Bashkir, or can find these places on a map, or have ever visited them? There is a huge amount to do to build up our capacity to understand this. We need to network. This is fantastic, this conference. I'm so pleased we're doing it. We need to do things like this every month, every week, every day, building networks among the emigration, building networks between the emigre leadership and Western governments and think tanks and opinion formers, building visibility, getting this into the public discourse. And it may seem really difficult, and I'll finish on this, because it can seem quite daunting somehow. How are we going to get into this crowded, busy Western mindscape, discussions of the Idel Oral or Ingria or any of these things? Well, I remember the 1980s and the 1970s really clearly. And I remember how difficult it was, Roberts, for people like us in the West to get the fate of the Baltic states, which had actually been countries, were still had de jure statehood. And these efforts that we made, we were so pleased in 1974 when Otto von Habsburg put the case of the Baltic states on the agenda at the European Parliament. That was a really big deal, and I think that Mrs. Fortega and you and the other MEPs, you're standing in the footsteps of the giant Otto von Habsburg in what you're doing now to get this on the agenda here. That it was very dark and difficult times, and we celebrated every little gain, and boy did it pay off in the end. So although it may seem very difficult, I think we have to be really pleased that we've at least got this far, to be united and determined to stick close to our values. Remember that there's nothing the Kremlin likes better than when its enemies start quarrelling, and there's plenty of grounds for quarrelling. It's particularly difficult maintaining unity when you're in the emigration. But the emigration, this Russian emigration we have now, these hundreds of thousands of people from the Russian Federation living abroad, this is a great target of opportunity for us. These are people we can reach. It's much harder to get inside the Russian Federation, though we can get in with YouTube and Telegram and so on. But let's make the most of the emigration, and let's not make the mistake that we made in the 1920s and the 1930s, when we had again then hundreds of thousands of people from the Bolshevik Empire living abroad, and we failed to consolidate their identity, failed to do anything very much. In the end, it was almost worse than useless. So I thank you again for coming. It's a huge honor. I've learnt a huge amount. It's great to see familiar friends in the room, dear Ahmed, not least you, and your brave and lonely stance. It's an honor to see you here, and many others as well. So thank you very much, and let us keep the flame of victory in our hearts and do everything we can to fuel it. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah. Thank you, Edward, for your intervention. As always, if you are reading your articles or some videos, so, and it's always interesting, and this is exactly the same it's now. Next speaker, we have Luke Coffey from United States. He's a senior fellow in Hudson Institute. Should be remotely connected with us. Luke, you have a floor if you hear us. Please, floor is yours.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. We hear you.
Yes, perfect. It worked. Great. I want to thank the organizers, especially Free Nation, a Post-Russia Forum, the European Parliament, and the ECR group for inviting me to participate in this discussion today. I do apologize. I'm having to do this remotely, and I can't do it in person. But it's such an important topic for the reasons we've heard throughout the day, but also when Ed Lucas focused on the lack of strategic thinking in the West about the possibilities of a Russian defeat in Ukraine and what this might mean. That is so true. And that's what I really want to focus my comments on today. What should we be doing in Washington and in Brussels and London and other capitals in the West to prepare for this very real possibility? I don't believe that the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. I think what we saw in 1991 was the beginning of the collapse. I think it's still collapsing today. If you look around the region, whether it's border skirmishes between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, the ongoing fighting and tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Russia's invasion of Georgia in 2008, its annexation of Crimea in 2014, its large-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of last year, these are all signs that the Soviet Union is still collapsing, and we have not seen the outcome of this collapse yet. I believe that history has the ability to condense time. And when historians 200 years from now are writing about the era that is the breakup of the Soviet Union, they will likely identify Russia's invasion of Ukraine, large-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022 as perhaps the most consequential part of the breakup and collapse of the Soviet Union, and probably the final act of this collapse. So the topic of the panel, Western policy toward Russia beyond the status quo, what does this mean? The full collapse of the Soviet Union and the breakup of the Russian Federation. What does this mean for the West? I have a few assumptions that we need to consider because, of course, we don't know how exactly Russia will emerge after the end of Vladimir Putin. We don't know exactly how the war in Ukraine is going to end, but we still need to be planning for something. So I have a few planning assumptions that we can base our thinking on, and then I have several questions that policymakers need to be asking now so we are prepared for the eventuality of the collapse, the final collapse of the Soviet Union and the breakup of the Russian Federation. So the first planning assumption, which we can all agree on because it's been the topic of today's conference, is that Russia will further fragment. But unlike the emergence of the 15 new states in 1991, I think it's very unpredictable how exactly Russia will fragment further. I describe the original 15 states in 1991 as the emergency glass breaking. The glass on your car windshield, when it shatters in a neatly defined, safe way. The next round of breakup, the next round of glass shattering, will not be like this. It'll be very unpredictable. It could be very dangerous, and it will not be clean-cut or straightforward. And we need to start thinking about this. The next assumption is that we must consider is that there will be tens of thousands of young men disproportionately from ethnic minority regions of Russia that will have combat experience from fighting in Ukraine that will return home to their regions with little or no economic or social future. And many of these regions were represented here today, and they've been prone to independence movements and calls for self-determination, and this could accelerate these calls of self-determination and independence when these large number of young unemployed combat vets return back home if Russia's defeated in Ukraine. The other assumption, thinking more broadly and geopolitically, is that in any collapse of the Russian government, China and Turkey both will play a role throughout the region, trying to increase their own influence at the expense of Moscow's influence. Often this will take place outside of the borders of the Russian Federation as we know them today, but this competition and this desire to maximize influence could also take place inside the borders as we know of today regarding the Russian Federation. The next assumption, and Ed Lucas already talked about this, we should assume that the private armed groups will proliferate, and that these so-called private armies or subnational armed groups will become important power brokers for better or for worse in a post-Putin Russia. Especially when we'll have a society that will have tens of thousands of combat veterans because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The next assumption is that Putin's replacement, whoever he or she might not be, will not be Thomas Jefferson. It is likely that the next person who replaces Vladimir Putin will be just as nationalistic and authoritarian, and Western policymakers should stop hoping and wishing for this so-called moderate Russian leader that wants peace with its neighbors and wants reforms at home and wants to recognize the self-determination inside Russia's current borders today. And then the final assumption we need to prepare for and assume is that Russia will be back. Regardless of how bad Russia's defeat in Ukraine might be, regardless of how degraded the Russian economy and military could become as a result, Moscow will never abandon its imperial designs on Eastern Europe. And even if rearming and rebuilding takes several decades, Moscow will continue to be a threat to its neighbors, and the US and NATO should have their force posture based on this assumption. This idea, like we saw in the early 1990s, the so-called peace dividend, where we can pull back militarily from Europe because we have this new Russia. We should learn from this mistake. Now, I will conclude by posing several questions that policymakers in the West should be asking right now when it comes to preparing for this eventuality. The first question is, what can the U.S. and its allies start doing now to coordinate an international response for the inevitable calls for independence and self-determination that will emerge across Russia? It's been an honor to be a part of an event like this today with so many brave, courageous patriots representing their people and their nations. And there's no doubt that we will hear calls for self-determination in the future if the Russian Federation collapses. And the traditional mechanisms for decolonization, like the UN Special Committee on Decolonization, is not fit for purpose to deal with this new challenge. I mean, after all, Russia and China currently sits on the UN Special Committee on Decolonization. So we need to start thinking about the structures now to put them in place on how we can recognize these calls for self-determination. The next question that U.S. partners and NATO members and regional countries need to think about is how to stop internal fighting, internal civil war, and internal insurgencies inside Russia from spreading across the region. There's no easy answer to this, but the U.S. should start right now working with key countries across the broader region to enhance bilateral cooperation on security and military and law enforcement matters. That would be a good place to start. The next question is, how can the U.S. and our partners coordinate an international response to safeguard Russia's weapons of mass destruction? This is really the most difficult question that has no easy answer, but we need to start thinking about this now and not when it's too late. The next question is, how can NATO and the European Union take advantage of Moscow's weakness and push for a Big Bang enlargement to the remaining candidates and aspirant countries across the region, and perhaps for some of the new countries that it might emerge from the ensuing chaos of the collapse of the Russian Federation. There are several countries in the region that aspire to someday join the EU or NATO, but Russia has a de facto veto on this. We don't like to admit it, but that's the reality. And if the Russian Federation dissolves, then it really opens up new possibilities for some of these countries. And so what institutional reforms do we need to start thinking about now, let's say inside the EU or inside NATO, that can make bringing some of these countries into these organizations smoother and faster? The next question policymakers need to ask is, how can the U.S. and its partners coordinate economic and reconstruction assistance for the regions that are currently under Russian occupation, and for those regions inside the Russian Federation that will be seeking independence and self-determination? It is in America's interest, it's in the interests of our partners in Europe, that we get these countries that have suffered from Russian aggression back on their feet economically. This will bring stability and security to the region, and we need to start thinking about what we can do to prepare for this now. The next question policymakers need to ask is, how can we coordinate an international or regional response to resolving some of the existing border disputes between the Russian Federation and some of its neighbors if we see a collapse of the Russian Federation. While many of these border disputes might seem small to policymakers that could be located thousands of kilometers away, they have the potential to become a regional problem with global implications. And just a few examples in my mind are, of course, the northern territories between Japan and the Russian Federation. There are disputed islands in the Caspian Sea between Kazakhstan and Russia, and it's thought that some of these islands might have offshore oil and gas. And of course, something as mundane as the Estonian-Russian de facto border, where there's no legally agreed border. How will we think about some of these challenges if we see a breakup of the Russian Federation? And then my final question that policymakers need to start thinking about today is, how could we roll back Russian influence in other parts of the world, like Syria, like Libya, like in sub-Saharan Africa? If Russian influence declines because the Russian Federation collapses and the Kremlin's client states and proxy forces are affected by this, the U.S. needs to start working now with partners to develop a strategy to increase Western influence in these regions where Russian influence could decline. So in conclusion, I do believe that Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February of last year changed the security situation in the transatlantic community in a way not seen since World War II. And we have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to help Ukraine win and to put Russia back in its geopolitical box for a couple of generations, so we can start planning accordingly on how to advance our interests, our goals, in recognizing self-determination and bringing stability and security across the broader region. And today's conference is an important step along this path to realize this outcome. Thank you very much again for inviting me to speak and to participate today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Luke, for your excellent structuring of challenges ahead, and also for the right questions you asked. I hope you will deliver maybe also to somewhere in US the same questions for those who are responsible for that. So next speaker is Ilya Ponomarev, a Russian politician, businessman, and opposition, of course, the person who was The only one in State Duma in March 2014 who voted against annexation of Crimea to Russia. So, floor is yours, Ilya.
Thank you very much, and thanks for this brilliant opportunity, and thanks for organizing this and hosting this. I think it's extremely important that we are sitting here in European Parliament, in the very heart of European democracy, and we are discussing this key issue for the future. I will be speaking in Russian, because I think that it's most important right now that we speak with representatives of Russian regions and understand each other in full. I know that you understand everything, but we will discuss later. But still, that's what's most important at the moment. Вы знаете,
Well, I've listened to Luke very attentively, and I was boiling inside because what he told, it's the expression of a well-known position. We can do nothing. Russia should be isolated. Nothing good can be made out of it. We will last a couple of generations more, and then a Russian problem will come back again, and everything will be bad in the future. It's not like this, because the subject of this session is status quo. And we may be here in the political heart of Europe and discussing those issues, saying that something is bad and something is good. But we also can be politicians, decision makers, those who have power. The only ones who have power on this continent. And we have here representatives of Russian regions, the most radical representatives of the Russian regions. It means that you aspire for victory. And power doesn't start from just stating that I have power. Well, Yeltsin told that Putin has power, but power begins in your soul. It's a feeling. When you feel that you have power, it means that you really have it. And we see in Russia the agony of the old power, and there is a void. We don't know who will have power in future. So we have potential future leaders here in this room. So our first step is to feel deep in our hearts that we can do it. And power has, well, first of all, should be associated with army, with military force. So many of you who are here are very active in fighting on the battlefields in Ukraine. We have a Chechen battalion there. We have representatives from Bashkir. They also have a battalion in Ukraine, well, and many more others. I don't want to forget anyone. And of course, Russians are fighting in Ukraine against Russian Federation as well, because it's the first step to power. Well, then power is associated with economy, and few of people are dealing with it. But we shouldn't forget about it. Business should support it. Business elites should be on our side, because they could give us access to power in different regions. To get power, we need to be supported by the elites. And also, power is associated with political structures, with those people who are capable of managing and governing. And we have a long way to go so that we have those human resources. I am here as a representative of people's deputies, and we need to create political structures, because power is law, democracy is procedures. We need to write those laws and procedures on paper. It's useless to talk about sovereignty, prosperity, about parliamentary or presidential republics. Those words are empty if we don't write them on paper and don't write necessary laws and regulations. It's the fifth forum on this topic, and we need to understand that we should be concentrated. I know that previously members of Russian oppositions believed that Chechen opposition are separatists. They're against us. They are not supporting our cause. But this time is long gone away. We have our common enemy, Russian authorities. So the key to freedom of all the regions is not in Grozny, is not in Ufa, Novosibirsk, St. Petersburg. It's in Moscow. And we need to aspire for power in Moscow altogether.
And what is being carried out today in Ukraine is this coalition, which goes far beyond the framework of the coalition of different Russian territories, republics, and peoples. It's a global coalition. There's 54 states that gather together in Ramstein. We need to add these 34 territories that we were talking about today on the map. This is the global anti-Putin coalition. And each of these allies makes an input to this victory. Of course, we have a leader, which is Ukraine, the armed forces of Ukraine, who are the biggest revolutionary force in Ukraine. Ukraine didn't want this war. They want to have peace. They wanted to be independent, separate. They didn't want to take care of external problems, but that's what happened. So now we're in the situation whether they beat us or we beat them. And now everyone in Russia we need to help in this fight on the battlefield, to help the army to create partisan movement and to fight for this victory. The Europeans will not do this. Those people in Russia, they need to do this. Of course, here, all of us, we represent different regions. And of course, we do fight on the other side of the front line. And of course, we can see that most of the people are being killed, the representatives of the national republics. What is important is that everyone suffers, and our duty is to stop this. We need to get an agreement. We need to trust each other, and there's different disputes that we have between different representatives of the Russian opposition, different movements, different regions. We need to say to each other that we're in the same boat. We understand that old Russia is over, that the Russian Federation, as we knew it till today, will change, will not continue the way it is, and new country will arise. Some of the people who are here would like to be a part of this Russia. Some of them will not. But as a representatives of the Russian nation, we need to accept the sovereignty of all of the parts of this new Russia, but we need to have common legal procedures about how we're going to live together as one family, as divorced spouses, but we need to agree on this, and not after, but today. And the forum, the platform that we have here today is a great platform. And now the Union of People's Deputies now is discussing this new constitution and how all of the regions will be able to get their independence, or how they would like to be a part of a new Russia, and what part of sovereignty it will be able to give to this new country. Here we have a representative, Pavel Merzerin, who is organizing a group, regional group. And I invite all of you to participate in this Congress. One of the main principles is the principles of borders. And people like maps, no, but this is the closest way to blood. What is important is to start the wars with legal mechanisms, and then it is very important to have the will of people in this. The process of self-determination is a legal procedure, and we will need to define it. And when our colleagues ask us a question, how can we help you? I think that we can use the Chechen example over here. So Ukraine has recognized Chechnya and the government of Chechnya as a legitimate government, and we need to get the same. We need to fight for the same. We need to recognize existence of the new Russian power, Russian authority. Of course, Ukraine as a leader will need to do this, but also Poland, but also Baltic countries, the European Union, and the rest of the world. Sooner we do this, less blood there will be in Russia afterwards, and the unstable part of Russian elites will turn to our side. Legitimacy and weapons. So thank you. Thanks a lot for the weapons. We need more weapons. We need aviation. We already have Abrams, but we also need the F-16. And a decision was taken, but 31 Abrams, I think it's 30 for the Ukrainian army and 1 for Arkady Babchenko. But the aviation, airplanes, we need them as well. We will win, and we'll do everything not to have a new threat from the East again.
It was, I would say, like Paul McCartney had a song, a long and winding road, but this road should be walked very quickly, fast. So this is a really challenging time. So thank you very much. Next speaker again is remote speaker, Oleg Dunda, member of Verkhovna Rada. Can you hear me? And you have a floor if you can switch. Thank you. So the floor is yours.
Добрый день, слышно меня?
Hello, can you hear me? I'm happy to be at this conference. Fortunately, I work remotely. It would be great to get acquainted to new people, to new friends, but unfortunately, I'm here in Kiev and need to work with you remotely. I was listening very carefully to today's speeches. I would like to react on one of the questions about Ukraine, then we're going to talk about the EU, about the future, etc. First thing, how Ukraine, including me, as an MP, how we will receive reparation when the Russian Empire will collapse? And I would like to answer this question. Well, the reparation, we will receive them not after a peace agreement, but after the Russian Empire signs a capitulation, which foresees, of course, its dismantlement. How can it happen? Well, we'll see that the most of the money Russia gets from the region, starting from Buryatia. And I'm sure and I know that the new government of Ingushetia, of Tatarstan, of Tyumen will be happy to send 15% of the exportation of the raw materials during 10 years as a fee for participation of these regions in the war. It's going to be much less than Tyumen sends today to Moscow. And I'm sure they will say, they will agree on this. And this is how this reparation can happen. I don't see any other possibilities apart from the frozen Russian money away abroad. Coming back to the main discussion, we have heard representatives of different peoples. I'm not going to talk about their interest of dismantlement of the Russian Empire. I would like to talk about the Western Occidental democratic world. What would be the benefits? How the collapse of the empire will benefit these countries? And for this, we need to come back to 1991. This is the EU in 1991. We see 12 countries. Please go back to the previous slide. So we see 12 countries. The GDP is about $6.74 trillion. This is the beginning of this huge European project that we see today. Please, next slide. Well, 23 years later, EU in 2014, and just before the beginning of the big European war waged by Russia. Well, we don't have UK anymore, but it's not important. So the GDP is more than $15 trillion. We see a big successful project, which could happen thanks to the collapse of the Soviet Empire. We wouldn't see that if there were no collapse. And now we see the attempts to influence Hungary, Baltic countries, to dismantle the European project that we have today. And it is a proof, evidence of the fact, the existence of the project, of the big European project, with a very aggressive neighbor is not possible on their eastern borders. We'll also need to remember that in 1991, and previous speakers talked about this, there was no one from the Big West has foreseen the collapse of the Soviet Empire, of the Russian Empire. Of course, we can remember the chicken speech of George W. Bush. But which is weird, the biggest beneficiaries of this collapse were those who didn't want the collapse. But the errors that we made in 1991, they made this tragedy possible today. And of course, Russian Empire goes to its collapse, but we don't need to repeat our mistakes. Please, next slide. We're at 1991. You see the biggest countries, the leaders of the Western world, the United States of America, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. And you have the comparison between 1992 and 91-92 and 2014, and you have the GDP per capita and defense budget. What can we see from these numbers? See that the GDP per capita doubled or tripled between 1991 and 2014, but the defense budget didn't double at all. And if you take a look at Germany, it was at 42 billion, and now, and in 2014 it was 46 billion, more or less the same situation in the other countries. So these years were the years of prosperity, the years of blossoming of the Western democracies. And it could happen because the Soviet Empire disappeared. And they were beneficiaries of it. And all the citizens of these countries, they become beneficiaries of it. And the effect could have been much bigger. And it wasn't much bigger because of the errors that were committed, the mistakes. Next slide, please. What I'm talking about, after the collapse of 1991, there were 14 other republics. And the Western democracies, they missed this window of opportunity and they didn't establish good economical relationships with them. And what could have they done? So we have a good example of Kazakhstan over here, who wanted to cooperate with the EU. And we see in 2021, see the 160 billion investments from the EU, the exports to the EU countries from Kazakhstan, 23 billion. Imports, 6 billion. Almost 6 billion. Kazakhstan as a home for the biggest corporations who actually involved Kazakhstan in this efficient international cooperation, while you have the companies Chevron, Total, etc. And Kazakhstan develops this cooperation with the EU, and this cooperation should have been organized by the EU with Turkmenistan, with Belarus, so we wouldn't have the threat that we have today, with Armenia and other countries. And these are the errors that have been made, and that's what we're talking here today about. Another example, let's take Azerbaijan. Well, let's imagine Azerbaijan is stays under Russia, under Soviet Empire. Who would be Berlin's and Paris' partner, gas and oil partner? I don't think it would be Baku today. And I think here is the future of the EU, where on the borders of the EU you have a lot of free countries, democratic countries, where you can establish a good economical relationships based on competition, on democracy, without blackmailing, without blackmailing through oil and gas. And this future should happen, and we need to prepare this future. So Tatarstan, Ichkeria, Tyumen will become Kazakhstan. And another thing that we hear from our Occidental Western partners when we talk about collapse of the Russian Empire, but well, previous speakers were talking about private military companies, about chaos that will happen in Russia. We need to prepare for this, we, the Europeans. So there are two other factors that are regularly mentioned when we talk about the threat of this collapse. Well, denuclearization, this is one of it. And now we can go back to the beginning of the 90s, the 20th century. This is the experience, but we don't need slides anymore. So the experience of Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine. We have this example. In the beginning of the 90s, these countries, Belarus, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan, have agreed upon denuclearization in order to be recognized as members of the international community. The same will happen to Buryatia or to Tatarstan. Why would Buryatia need nuclear weapons, nuclear arms? Would they wage a war against Tuva? Of course not. Of course, very logically, they will give these weapons to Western democracies in order to be legitimized, in order for their sovereignty to be recognized. And it will happen to all the states, and there are no other possibilities. And if we launch this process correctly, in this space, we'll be able really to denuclearize the whole world. Let's imagine this world, this without nuclear weapons. So of course, it's going to be a bigger European project than we have today. And another thing concerning the lessons that we have to learn from 90s. Different speakers were talking about this before myself. Tatarstan, Kalmyk, and Bashkortostan, they have voted for their independence. But at that time, the Western democracies were blind about this process. We need to come back to this process. Tatars, Bashkirs, they have already taken this decision, and we need to recognize them as independent states. We have to give them this possibility. Well, today, very often was the question how EU could help. Well, the first thing is to start the discussion. So we need to define, identify the problem. We can say we don't have alternative today, and we need to prepare ourselves for the future. And we have already launched this process. The other thing that we can decide upon here today with you, we can help these potential states, new states on the territory of post-Russia, to organize the process of self-determination. Very soon we will launch the process of the referendum in Ingria, self-determination of Ingria, of Kuban, of Ural and Siberia and other regions. We need just to receive the support. And then, of course, these states should be recognized as those who want the sovereignty and that are independent. That's what Ukraine did with Ichkeria, and Tatarstan, Bashkortostan will be the next ones. That's what was said, by the way, was said by the Polish government. And not only Ukraine, but we're all waiting for Berlin, Washington, Paris, and other countries to recognize these people as people who have a right to self-determination according to different international resolutions and conventions. And then the process will follow. We would need just to help them. Let's launch this. Let's start this. Thank you very much for your invitation. And well, I hope that those who haven't met yet will be able to do this soon in the future.
We are running out of the time, as you may know. So, but I will do my best, and I ask colleagues also to understand the situation. Next one is Carlos Uriarte Sanchez from Spain, Consul at the European Society Coudenhove-Kalergi. He's a lawyer in different institutes and also companies, and Secretary General of Pan Europa Spain. Floor is yours.
Okay. Dear colleagues, let me introduce myself. My name is Carlos Uriarte Sanchez, Secretary General of Pan-Europa Spain. I'm Professor of Law at Rey Juan Carlos University in Madrid, Spain. First, I want to thank the organizers for bringing me the opportunity to talk in this forum. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you. After the pandemic of COVID-19, when we thought the world would start a time of recovery, not only in Europe, but in the whole world, however, the Russian Federation decided to begin a war not only face Ukraine, but face the liberal and democratic world, with the target of destroying the liberal order and the multilateral order created after the Second World War. The response of the democratic world was clear, and we have jointly faced this aggression of Russia against Ukraine. This huge effort of the European Union and NATO allies will not stop. We cannot keep the same status quo in relation with Russia that we had already in the past. We need to finish the war in which the aggressor, Russia, and the victims, Ukrainians, they demand justice and rule of law, and this rule of law and justice must be preferred, and they are not at the same level. We must send a clear message to our authorities and to Russian leadership in this regard. After the war, President Vladimir Putin and other decision makers will be responsible of this war, and they will have to be carried, face the International Penal Court, and Russia will have to pay money compensations, reparations, for the reconstruction of Ukraine. On the other hand, we will need to rebuild our relations with the Russian Federation to build a new space of freedom, democracy, and security in Europe. We will need to rebuild confidence and dialogue with Russia as an important player in the international politics. We will have to help Russia to develop their democratic institutions. We must support the democrats in Russia and in Belarus. Going into the topic, Ukraine's war have turned up all the warning lights in Europe, and it has opened again new challenges we have seen before in our history. It was in 1952 when René Pleven presented his project to create the European Defence Community, which took effect by the sign of the Treaty of Paris. It was one of the first projects that what today we know as European Union has carried on. Unfortunately, it has.
К сожалению, этот проект.
And NATO was created under an ideological union, the one which democracy took to win against communism. European Union and NATO have been growing together during all this time, the first in a political way, and the second in a defensive way. I think that one of the most important things we have noticed with the Russian invasion is that we need to adapt our international alliances for nowadays for a globalized world. Europe, we have been many years a bit sleepy due to the peace. We thought that after World War I and World War II, we were not going to see again war in Europe. So we focused regionally on economic growth, generating independence resources, and forgetting to keep on point our armies. I will be clear. It's time for the European Union to start a truly European foreign and security policy compatible with NATO. In this way, I want to say that the joint declaration on European Union-NATO cooperation of the 10th January, it's a good starting point. In its 13th point, it says, we will take the NATO-European Union partnership forward in close consultation and cooperation with all NATO allies and EU member states, in the spirit of full mutual openness and in compliance with the decision-making autonomy of our respective organizations and without prejudice to the specific character of security and defence policy of any of our members. In this context, we view transparency as crucial. We encourage the fullest possible involvement of the NATO allies that are not members of the European Union in its initiatives. We encourage the fullest possible involvement of the European Union members that are not part of the alliance and its initiatives. In this context, the paper of an independent European Union is crucial to take coordinated actions to improve our efficiency and our creation capacity in security affairs next to our borders. Not only if we talk about Ukraine. The recent tensions in North Kosovo have once again shown that the Balkans, southeastern Europe, is a region in need of a clear strategic European Union policy. It's not the first time that Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić had set fire to this region. Serbia is also doing the same in Montenegro and in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Through its enlargement policy, the European Union has instruments to build up the necessary pressure to Serbia. The European Union only needs to act in a united manner and be prepared to use these instruments in a targeted manner. Another of our threats is China. China is thinking long term. In 2049, the country will celebrate 100 years of the founding of the People's Republic of China. This is a date we must keep in mind when dealing with the Chinese politics, because Beijing's clear goal is to have fully integrated Taiwan into China by then. This is also tell us something about the possible time horizon if China wants to achieve this goal militarily, because full integration means that by both the war and the reconstruction must be over and done with. They are also rearming military, and at the same time they are running after their own citizens' rights and looking the other way if we talk about human rights in the international society. We need to have a European agenda with China in every single field. We enable done a good reply according to the European self-interest. Europe needs an own voice to say how international society grows. Russia will continue the war if we don't fight together against other allies of Russia, such as Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, and North Korea. To achieve that, Europeans will need to talk with a common and single voice. We, Europeans, we need to continue helping Ukraine with more sophisticated weapons, and we must continue helping refugees, but we must think in the reconstruction of Ukraine to join in the future as soon as possible the Euro-Atlantic structure, the NATO, but also join the European Union. Ukraine belongs to the European family and to the family of Western values, inspired on the respect to human dignity, democracy, and the rule of law. Before, I was asked by one of the participants in this amazing conference why I came to Brussels at the European Parliament to give my support to Ukraine and all those Russians who are Democrats, who are against the war, and they wish in a different Russia based on freedom, democracy, and rule of law. And I answered, on the one hand, I came here because the war against Ukraine is a war against Europe. It means a war against Spain, a war against me and as a Spanish and European who belong to Europe, a community based on the rule of law. And we are part of this so-called free democratic world. And on the other hand, I came as a sign of solidarity. If we want that other Europeans consider important the dangers, for example, in the South Mediterranean, in this case, jihadist terrorism or illegal migration, we must show our commitment with democracy in Eastern Europe, especially when Europe is at an existential moment, when the European Union is at a crossroad. In this regard, it has been for me a great honor and pleasure to have contributed to this important international conference organized in Brussels at the European Parliament. initiatives as such, they are more necessary nowadays than ever to put in touch European civil society and experts from the European Union with experts and civil organizations from USA, Ukraine and Russia. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Spasiba.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Now I would like to give the floor again to representative from the United States, Janusz Bugajski, a senior fellow of Jamestown Foundation, Washington, D.C. He's author of more than 20 books about Europe, Russia, transatlantic relationships, and so on. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't represent all of the United States, by the way. Actually, something funny that Edward said at the very beginning, how policymakers need to learn the difference between, I don't know, Karelia and Khakassia, or Saka and Bashkortostan. I remember when the Yugoslav war broke out, trying to explain to policymakers the difference between Slovenia, Slovakia and Slavonia. And that was an uphill struggle for quite a time. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me to this groundbreaking and what I believe is a state-creating event. And the more that Moscow attacks you, the more that Moscow attacks the forum and its participants, the more it reveals its fear of imperial collapse. So be proud. I will focus my remarks on the benefits that Russia's rupture will bring, although I fully understand some of the dangers that Luke very correctly, very accurately listed as Russia fractures. And in fact, it's part of my new book, and for which we must be prepared. But I want to look at the positives. So 3 main points I want to make. First of all, context. Second, benefits. And thirdly, policy. Context. Russia is a failed state, which happens to be the title of my new book. It is unable to transform itself into a nation state, a civic state, or even a stable imperial state. Russia is a federation in name only. The central government denies any powers to the country's 83 republics and regions, and I deliberately exclude Crimea and Sevastopol as federal subjects. However, the country's multiple weaknesses are now being fully exposed, including a contracting economy, increasingly squeezed by international sanctions, and hopefully by a huge fall in revenue because of, let's say, Europe's increasing energy dependency and Russia's inability to sell at the same price to other countries. Secondly, military defeats in Ukraine that reveal the incompetence and corruption of Russia's ruling elite, and disquiet in numerous regions, which I think will grow over shrinking regional budgets. Moscow is exhausting its capacities to hold the country together. The rupture of the Russian Federation, I believe, will be driven by elite power struggles, and I can't remember, somebody said that this has already begun, and intensifying rivalries between the central government and disaffected regions. It will also embolden the emergence of new states and inter-regional federations that control their own resources and no longer send their men to die for Moscow's empire. I have developed several scenarios of rupture, by the way, in my recent book, various combinations. I mean, you can't just look at the history. You've got to look at any potential new kinds of emergence of new states which can forge relations with neighbours. Okay, concrete benefits, and I'll go through as quickly as possible. As Moscow turns inwards, its capacity for foreign aggression will diminish. A rump Muscovite state under intense international sanctions, with falling energy revenues, depleted budget, and shorn of its resource base in Siberia without modern technology, will have severely restricted, reduced capabilities to attack its neighbours or foment unrest outside its borders. Its ability to entangle Europe in energy dependence, engage in political corruption, and spread disinformation will be curtailed. NATO's eastern flank from the Arctic to the Black Sea will become more secure, and this will enhance economic development and regional cooperation. Ukraine and Moldova can regain their occupied territories and petition for EU and NATO integration without fear of Russia's reaction. Belarus can secure its independence, build a democracy, and develop productive relations with its neighbours. In the Western Balkans, without Russian support, Serbia's ability to destabilize the region will be reduced, and the threat of partition or armed conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo and Montenegro will recede. The EU project can gather momentum, and NATO will no longer have an internal flank that it will need to protect from Moscow's ambitions. And very good point by my colleague here, Professor Uriarte. The only thing I would add is Spain's recognition of Kosovo, together with the other 4 NATO members, would certainly help in stabilizing and preventing Vucic from setting new fires in the region. I continue. In the Caucasus, Georgia will be able to negotiate the return of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, or the Tskhin Valley region, as autonomous republics within a Georgian federation. Armenia and Azerbaijan will be able to sign a peace treaty without Moscow's interference. This will also undercut negative Iranian influences in the region and help Turkey to develop relations with Turkic-speaking states in Central Asia and Turkic nations in the Russian Federation. And of course, for our Caucasian friends, as Georgia and Azerbaijan will be able to forge relations with the emerging independent republics of the North Caucasus and help to guide them to become new partners with Western institutions in various domains. Central Asian states will become increasingly liberated and can deepen their energy, economic and security connections with Europe and NATO. We're already witnessing this. How much more outspoken and independently active are the Central Asian countries as they see Russia weakening? Pro-Western states freed from the Russian Federation can enhance stability in several regions of Europe and Eurasia. China will prove a challenge. Although in a weaker position to expand its influence by collaborating with the failed Russia, no longer has that support. It will seek to benefit from Russia's rupture also by expanding its presence among new states in Siberia and the Pacific, the Far East. The US and the EU must therefore deepen their presence in these regions and work with Japan, with Canada, South Korea and other countries in the Far East to open up avenues for diplomatic, political and economic cooperation with embryonic allies. Regions and republics in Russia's Far East will seek recognition and investment from abroad. And similarly to the Central Asian states, they will resist incorporation into an expanding Chinese economic empire. My third point, this is, I think, penultimate. I have one other after this. Third point, shortcomings of Western policy. Some Russia experts tell us that we help Putin by talking about Russia's collapse, because this allegedly mobilizes the public in support of the regime. On the contrary, I would argue that it is our silence, denials, and the lack of forward policy that helps Moscow. The Kremlin, for instance, claims that the West wants to destroy Russia regardless of US and EU policy. Denials from Washington and Brussels simply fuel Kremlin conspiracies, similarly to the narrative about the alleged NATO threat. Western leaders have tried to convince Russian officials that NATO is not a threat to Russia for over 2 decades. And have failed, I think, to realise that the Kremlin deliberately invents Western threats regardless of actual policy to keep this regime in power. A much more effective approach would be to clearly specify what the West supports in Russia. Open backing for pluralism, democracy, federalism, civil rights, and the autonomy of republics and regions can help embolden Russia's citizens by demonstrating that they are not globally isolated, which is the narrative of the regime. They also need information that Moscow suppresses, especially the advantages of forming new states that cultivate peaceful and productive relations with their neighbours. 2 more points, very quickly. Although nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction remain a potential threat, Russia's leaders will not commit national suicide by using them against the West. As with the Soviet elite, they will try to salvage as much as they can of their political futures and economic fortunes. Even if some emerging states acquire such weapons, we keep hearing about loose nukes, they will have no reason to deploy them while seeking international recognition and economic assistance. Post-Russian states are likely to pursue nuclear disarmament, much like some of the post-Soviet states did after the breakup of the Soviet Union. My last point concerns what I call wishful thinking. Many Western leaders still believe that they can return to the post-Cold War status quo and fail to see the benefits of Russia's disintegration. As a result, instead of planning to capitalize on Russia's de-imperialization, they often appear stuck in this bygone era. I keep hearing this wishful thinking that beneficial relations can be established with a post-Putin Kremlin, or that Russian liberals can democratize the empire. I think Western leaders made a grave mistake when they assumed, and Edward pointed this out with his 3 points, but let me put it a slightly different way, when they assumed that the collapse of Soviet communism ensured the end of Russian imperialism, and Ukraine is now paying the price. They must avoid a second strategic mistake by presuming that the current empire is permanent. Imperial states invariably collapse when they overreach, as Moscow has in Ukraine, and where centrifugal pressures are fueled by economic decline, regional resentments, and national revivals. Government officials, I think, need to learn from forward-looking EU parliamentarians, such as Poland's former Foreign Minister Anna Fotyga, who are reaching out to Russia's republics and regions and demonstrating that citizens of the failed federation do have a future beyond the destructive imperial fantasies of the elite in the Kremlin. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jarosz. Everything is recorded. I expect your many thoughts it would be possible to see in a video on your social networks.
Oh, yes, yes,
so I see it, yes, it's really.
I stuck to 10 minutes, I think.
No, that's all right, yeah, but we are in a bit in a hurry, as always. Actually, next speaker is Vadim Sidorov, Centros Tropas Malandia, expert on ethno-political issues and PhD student in Charles University. So, floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the possibility to speak here. And I will speak about the importance of the strategy of practical and regional demilitarization of Russia. Because the demilitarization, it was a motto which Vladimir Putin used to begin this war against the Ukraine, but obviously, and it's clear that it is a Russia, Putin's Russia, and every imperial Russia, which needs its own demilitarization. So we have two levels actually with this topic. The global level is a level about the nuclear weapon and actually the every strategic weapon of mass destruction. And as it is global level, it is the point of discussion of the global community, and it is a responsibility of the international community and of the great world powers. But there is a regional level as well. So as far as I know, the organizers of this forum, they are already planning new forums regards the responsibility of Asian states and regions and regarding the relations of the United States and neighboring countries, but I will speak about specifically about the Europe, because there are border regions of Russian Federation, of current Russian Federation, which even after Russia will extract its arms from the Ukraine, they will remain dangerous for the neighboring countries of the of the NATO and those who are going to become part of NATO, like the Ukraine, for example. And as far as I know, many Ukrainian experts already discussing the importance of the demilitarization zone in the border regions, border with Ukraine, from the south part of Bryansk region till the northern part of Kuban. But if we will look at the map, so it, this is a map. There is a belt, the belt of regions, of border regions, with the European neighbors of Russian Federation. And what, for example, Ukrainian experts are talking about, that they need a safe zone and the demilitarized zone in the region which is with number 1. Actually, of course, it's clear that the problem of the Kaliningrad region has to be solved as well, because it's a permanent threat to its neighbors. Belarus, which is formally not part of Russian Federation, and thus it is showed as an independent state, but we understand that this independence has to be real. So Belarus has to be liberated from the Putin's puppet Lukashenko regime. And so after it will become reality, Belarus will face with same problem as Ukraine. So it needs also security from the potential threat from the neighbors regions, same as Baltic states. So the point is that in every conversation of European countries with potential Russian opposition, the problem of the demilitarization has to be on the table. But if we will only limit this conversation with the problem of demilitarization, so this situation won't be stable. So we need not only conversation about the demilitarization, but we need to involve these border regions in cooperation with their neighbors. Here I represent the Eastern Crimean platform. It is a platform of pro-European and pro-Baltic patriots in 3 Russian regions, which have borders with European countries. It's Smolensk region, it's Pskov region, and Tver region, which actually hasn't such borders, but which is a part of big historical region with ours. And we are not only one such a region. There are many such regions in this. If you see in the map, it's like a belt. So we need to involve the representatives of these regions in every conversation with potential new Russian power or actual Russian opposition about the security, actually common security of European Union, NATO, its neighbors, Russian globally, with connection in connection with topics of denuclearization and strategical demilitarization of Russia, and those neighbor regions as well. So the point is that we spoke about the expansion of NATO during these 30 years, and next step has to be, we need to do next step. Of course, we understand actually that the recognition and even the real making of new independent internationally recognized states it is a very complicated process which is connected with the structure of global legal and political order. So we are not so naive to wait, immediately recognition of new states in those regions. But at the very least, we expect that European countries will think about their own security and will look to those regions of current Russian Federation which are historically connected with them, because all those regions in Russia, like Pskov, like Novgorod, like Ingria, which we spoke about today, like Smolensk region, and so on and so on, they have strong historical connection with Europe. So they want, and at least their European, pro-European patriots who we must support, they won't come back to the Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. And well, we have two speakers more. So next one is Reinhard Klauczek from Austria, Secretary General of Pan-European Movement Austria. Floor is yours.
Mr. Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, we are speaking about Western policy towards Russia beyond the status quo. So let me have a short look on this status quo. The West is somehow divided into the United States of America and Europe. The United States of America is a world power with a political strategy and a strong military. Europe, in its western part, is a post-heroic society where only about 20% of the population would be ready to defend its own country. Europe is rich and weak. After the fall of the Iron Curtain, the illusion of eternal peace broke out. Military capacities were radically cut. The peace dividend was collected, the money was put into welfare state redistribution programs. Via several initiatives, the West tried to integrate Russia into the community of civilized countries. Think about the Russia-NATO partnership, think about the EU-Russia dialogue. Trade with Russia was intensified, cheap energy was Putin's way to buy politicians in the West. Gerhard Schröder might be the most well-known Western politician who is on Putin's payroll, but he is not the only one. None of these European politicians had any problem to become lobbyists for Russian interests, and many are still active in that. Only in the eastern part of Europe, in the countries which have been under Russian control before the fall of the Iron Curtain, we could hear voices saying, "Take care. Putin is not a friendly guy. He is an old KGB agent who does his job. He is lying." This is the status quo, and that means that we have a political lead in Western European countries which now has to learn its lessons. And these lessons is, first, Putin is not a good guy. You can never trust him. There is no end of history and no eternal peace. The old saying, si vis pacem para bellum, which means be prepared for the war if you want peace, unfortunately still applies and will continue to do so. Russia is not part of European culture. Russia is closer to the Khanate of the Golden Horde than to Western civilization. We must be clear that Russia's war against Ukraine is not just an attack on Ukraine. It is an attack on Europe, on our model of life, on democracy, freedom, liberty, human rights, the rule of law, and market economy. It's a war unleashed by Eastern despotism against Western democracy. This is the lesson our politicians, especially in the western part of Europe, had to learn in the year 2022, and what many politicians still have to learn, as they are still living in this illusion of eternal peace. And we also have to learn the lesson that no European country is strong enough to defend itself against Russian aggression. I'm the Secretary General of the Pan-European Movement in Austria, and we believe that this Europe this is a geopolitical approach of European unification with a clear vision of a European foreign and security policy. And I think Putin's war against Ukraine and Europe proves that we are right with this approach. Europe needs a common European foreign policy and security policy. European foreign policy does not only mean coordination of the foreign policies of 27 member states, but a real foreign policy with a foreign minister for the European Union. This is precisely the question of sovereignty that many national egoists love to talk about, because sovereignty in this specific case means the ability to act and to shape. In terms of potential, a European foreign policy would bring clear added value compared to a purely national state policy. And enlargement policy is part of such an European foreign policy. At the same time, we have to bring our military capabilities back up to a level where we can defend ourselves. This requires more defence budgets and also more European cooperation in defence politics and in the military industry. The West should also immediately confiscate the approximately $300 billion in currency reserves held by the Russian central bank with 7 Western central banks. The money will be necessary for the reconstruction of Ukraine, and it would be a mistake not to do so. In the same way, the legal conditions must be created to be able to use all the frozen assets of Russian oligarchs of the Putin system for reparation. Only a united Europe will be able to secure liberty in Europe.
Thank you, Reinhard. And last but not least, of course, is Čedomir Stojković from Serbia. Čedomir Stojković is a lawyer, activist from Belgrade, leader of the group October, Alliance of Free Serbia, which in May 2022 revealed more than 4,000 agents of Vladimir Putin in Serbia. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me. We have a shortage of time, and I will try to put this in a very short way. But I also need to ask you for patience, because I think the issue is very important, and it's about security of all Europe. So thank you in advance. So I should explain, but because we don't have time, I will put just in this form. We all know about political virus. It's a term that we used. We all know about hybrid operation, which is a term that we use now. But we also know for term of Russian malignity, which is used often in these days. But I want to introduce you with new term, and it is hybrid occupation. I'm coming from a country which is under Russian hybrid occupation. That country is Serbia. There is no coincidence between Serbian politics. That's not coincidence. It's not a policy that is felt from the sky. It is a policy that is orchestrated by Moscow, and it's operated by Moscow. Everything started in 2008, when Russia Federation, for only 400 million euros, bought the oil industry of Serbia. The income of oil industry in Serbia is 2.5 billion euros per year. It's a huge for Serbia, because Serbian budget is 11 billion of euros. So it means that 1/5 of money flow is controlled by Russia, by Vladimir Putin itself. To put this in picture, it is more than military, defense, police, intelligence budget of Serbia combined. So if we make some comparison with United States, it will be like Putin controls Amazon, Apple, ExxonMobil, Microsoft, Bank of America, General Motors, and many other companies for 14 years. So in that kind of state, what would Americans thought about Putin today? The same as Serbian think. 2014, it wasn't attack on one country. It was attack on 2 countries. It was devastating attack in Ukraine. military attack, but it was also attack on Serbia, hybrid intelligence and so on, attack on Serbia. They take our policy, they take our interest. We don't have our policy, we do not conduct our interest. By those corruption, by those money from oil industry of Serbia, Vladimir Putin and Russia regime conduct huge strategic corruption in Serbia. They bought many television stations, they bought many newspapers, they bought practically everything that create public opinion. It is something like CNN, ABC, CNBC, CBS, NBC, New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, etc. Are owned by Vladimir Putin in the United States. And again, question, how many Americans will support Putin in that case? The same amount, the same percent as it states now in Serbia. It's called informational occupation. Through that occupation, Vladimir Putin conduct also collective psychology operation, which present West as evil and portrayed Putin as some kind of god, which by many other operation brainwashed the population. So it's like a virus, it's very malignant. So through that money, through strategic corruption, Vladimir Putin actually established political party in Serbia. And through that political party, they conduct more and more interest of Russia. There is no political party now in Serbia that is out of Vladimir Putin influence. No matter is it position or is it opposition. We must notice one very, very important thing. They put political strategy in Serbia in that way that we, who are pro-Western people there, who are pro-Western groups there, we don't have any resources, we are cut off. We are cut off from media, we are cut off from financing, we cannot have and conduct political fight. Only political fight that happen in Serbia is political fight between pro-Russian political party. We, who are pro-Western, who are pro-European, who are pro-NATO, we are cut it off. So that is political occupation of Serbia. I will give you one example, actually two. And I can give you many examples, but because of shortage of time, let's have those two. The director of Serbian intelligence service is Putin's man. But things are not end there. The board of Serbian parliament, which supposed to control Serbian intelligence service, have 9 members. 8 of them are controlled by Vladimir Putin. So, I repeat, it is political occupation. Through all of that, Putin and Russia propaganda put in Serbians' mind numerous lies, that there is some huge historical ties between Serbia and Russia. False, lies, there is no any. Lies that there is great cooperation between Serbia and Russia. Lies, there is no any product made in Serbia that is in market in Moscow, and vice versa. There is no products that made in Moscow which you can find in Serbia market. But in the term of propaganda, it looks like we are some kind of brothers. And you will see and you will heard in the political area, in the public area, how many people from Russia, from Serbia speaks, Russia are the brothers, Russians are brothers. False statement, only conducted by propaganda. So through all of this information, Vladimir Putin and Russian Federation changed the political character of the nation from the pro-Western, pro-European nation. We became like Russian oblasts. We are now in terrible situation. But when I said in terrible situation, it's not unchangeable and it's not pessimistic. This is actually very optimistic statement, because there is a way how things can be changed. And I want to put this in front of you. Yes, there are many people say, okay, there is many percent of Serbs who are pro-Russians. Just because of one thing. There is like, I don't know, 10 or 15 hard pro-Russian, 10 or 50% of hard pro-Russian population. But we who are hard pro-Western population in Serbia, we made 20%. That is the stake. What is between of us is just, it's pro-Russian now just because we are cut off from any kind of resource for political fight. So, because of all that, I can now now I can speak to you about influence and everything, but we don't have time for this, so I will skip that for some other things. But this is important. When war broke, when war broke, the same headlines that you had in Moscow, you had in Serbia. We wrote how Ukraine attacked Russia and how Russia needs to fight to protect themselves from Ukraine. When I was, and I'm going to put this just to represent how political situation in Serbia is. When I went in Ukraine in the middle of the war to make some activities to raise awareness and everything, no party support me. No single party support me. No position, no opposition. I repeat, it is political occupation. So because of there is many topics I want to give you solution. Because of time, I need to cut everything that I wanted to tell you. But we need to change this status quo. We need to change how West behave to Russia. So we need to be aware of this. The West must interfere in internal party matters and internal political matters in Serbia. Must, because Russia got involved a long time ago, and by that change everything good in Serbia. When European Union do something good, or United States do something good in Serbia, because of the Russian propaganda, it turns in malignant way. So there is no good results. But now the times have never been better to change in Serbia because of this war. You have the X-ray of political situation, and you know who to support and who not to support. So European Union, United States, West must involve in Serbia internal political situation. The second, somebody mentioned, there is a huge danger because of Serbian ties with our surrounding countries. That is why Putin conduct a hybrid occupation of Serbia. He wants to control situation in Balkan in the way that he can provoke war anytime he wants. Because of, I will not speak now about geopolitics, strategic, I guess we all know that. But he wants that control, and he achieved that control. So, through all of those systems I explained. What needs to be done? The West must establish anti-hybrid center, and it must be created on Balkan. That anti-hybrid center must fight Russian propaganda, must fight any kind of Russian influence that came in Balkan. It is the only way to achieve the permanent peace in Balkan, because if the Russian is there, if Putin is there, there will be no reconciliation, there will be no peace between nations, because he will always try to put this, and I will be quick, I know that...
Chedomir, I really ask you to make your last thought as a conclusion, and then we will finish.
Last statement. West need to put pressure now on Serbia. We need to expel Russians from Serbian oil industry. Gas must be bought somewhere else. Serbia must impose sanctions to Russia. We need to arrest any person who are involved in the military operation in Ukraine on the side of Russia. We need to cut off Wagner Group from Serbia. We need to cut off strategic corruption. We need to expel all Russian media media and all Russian influence per then, and you will know that Serbia is the right way and in the right path when Serbia sends weapons to Ukraine, because Serbia also have tanks that can be used in Ukraine. And by this statement, I will finish my speech. Europe is not safe until all Europe is safe. Serbia and Balkan is part of that Europe. Thank you very for your patience.
Thank you very much. Thank you for many comparisons and facts and also tasks what should be done. So, colleagues, we are 15 minutes behind the schedule. I thank you for everybody who were very quickly gave us key points, and thank you very much for listening. We touched so many angles of the problem. And of course, it's difficult to debate if we are discussing some issues, but. I would like to thank really all panelists and also the audience here and also interpreters. I don't know, did they survive, but thank you very much. Thank you very much for everybody.